Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if neglected Naruto wants to be left alone. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by GrimMalice and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. The blonde shinobi stood near the gates of the sleeping village, veiled in the shadow of night as he took in the sight of his village of the leaf. He took a moment to reflect on how long it had been since he left the place, unable to suppress the tinge of loneliness that crept up his spine as he drew closer to the village gates. He remembered the day his life was changed forever. Flashback. After Naruto and company had defeated Akatsuki's Kakuzu with his newly acquired Futon Rasengan Shuriken, Naruto realized that perhaps he wasn't strong enough to face his old teammate again. Sakura and him trained constantly, preparing for their next possible encounter with the diabolical Akatsuki or even Sasuke if they were lucky enough to come across him. Over some months Sakura had begun to open up to Naruto, even going as far as joining him on a few dates. Even stranger, they actually began hanging out together when they both weren't busy training, something that Naruto found himself enjoying even more than their actual dates. He began to notice a change in behavior towards him, gearing towards a bond he only dreamed of. Although it felt great, he had a terrible dread in the back of his mind that it would end up hurting him some way down the road. He killed those thoughts as fast as possible. One evening after enjoying a wonderful night out on the town with Sakura, he walked her home from one of the best dates they had been on yet. Both stood idly in front of her apartment door, preparing to say their goodbyes. "I had a great night, Naruto. I was surprised you knew how to dance like that," she said, blushing at the memory of their rather intimate dance positions only hours earlier, after having a lovely dinner at one of the most splendid restaurants in the village. "While traveling with the pervy sage, I kinda learned a few things when we stopped in towns. I usually had to babysit him when he went to dance clubs, always claiming he had important research he needed to do," he said, gesturing air quotes and everything. She laughed and laughed, listening to his stories of how his old sensei's face would be black and blue at the end of many nights from all the women he asked out, their reactions quite similar to his Sakura's past answers when Naruto would ask her out. Naruto looked down at her feet, stalling like he always did. "Thanks again for coming out with me tonight, I hope we can do that again really soon," he said, as he lightly bowed his head and closed his eyes. Before he had time to react, her arms wrapped around his neck, her body pressed tightly against his chest. "Did you think you could get away so easily without properly saying goodbye?" she asked in a silvery tone. Her pink lips formed a sexy grin as she watched his eyes open in confusion, clearly savoring the shock in his eyes. As he opened his mouth in astonishment, he felt her soft lips mash into his own, holding his neck in place in her delicate arms. Instinctively he clutched her delicate form, pulling her hungrily into his chest, returning the kiss with equal tenacity. After a long exchange by the young lovebird, she leaned her head back, gradually breaking the kiss and resting her forehead against his. Their gaze bored deep into one another as he enclosed his arms around her waist, nothing but their excited breathing filling the silence of night. "Now, you can go," she said, winking at her befuddled date and closing the door. After that night they remained as friends in public at Naruto's request. He didn't want her burdened by the village's hate for him, even if it had subsided tremendously. When they were in private, things were a different story, though it did hurt and little that he could not share their relationship with the world. A few months after their first kiss, a tip from Jiraiya regarding Sasuke's whereabouts was filtered through his various spy networks to the shinobi of the leaf. When Naruto found out, he secretly left that night without informing anyone, including the Hokage. Not even Sakura. A month had passed without any word if the blonde was alive or dead when suddenly a figure appeared at the village's front gates, with another figure lying limply over his shoulders. As soon as the entrance guard spotted him, the standing figure passed out and crumpled to the ground. Everyone quickly learned that Naruto had returned, but the other fact was almost unbelievable. Sasuke was finally in their custody. They both had suffered tremendous wounds, and as for how, no one knew. After recovering them from the front gates, they were immediately hospitalized and both slept for weeks. Sakura and the other rookie 9 with their respected jounins visited them as often as possible, most coming to see the recovering blonde over the returned traitor. Sasuke was the first to wake and was questioned immediately about what had happened to the both of them. Orochimaru was of course a fairly popular topic among the interrogators. After a very long talk with the Hokage and shinobi interrogators, he was declared a Leaf Nin once again, facing no charges of treason. One change that was necessary if he were to be reinstated as a Leaf Nin was the removal of his curse seal. Soon after their talk, Tsunade along with Shizune and almost every medic nin in Konoha worked in unison to begin the process of removing the mark. It took the combined chakra of many ninja, but after a laborious ceremony, they managed to remove the curse seal. Sasuke was subsequently released from the hospital and allowed to move back to his old house in the Uchiha sector. Naruto finally awoke from his slumber a week after Sasuke had been reinstated. He was discharged from the hospital after debriefing the Hokage of the grim details that had transpired in the last month. He explained how he and Sasuke had fought again, and that Itachi had shown up, which forced them to team up in order to take down the genius older brother. After a long battle, they had managed to wound Itachi, forcing him into retreat. Just wounding Itachi on such a level pushed them to their limits, both being grievously wounded by the end of the affair. Naruto explained that he made a promise to Sasuke that if he returned back to Konoha to face his charges, that he would help him hunt down Itachi and destroy the rest of Akatsuki, which they both surprisingly agreed that there was more than likely a link between the two. Sasuke had accepted the offer only if he was allowed to face Itachi alone, which Naruto bitterly agreed to. The team was back together, although Sasuke was still his normal ghost-like antisocial self. It had been almost 3 months since Naruto had brought him back, which by this time it was hard for Naruto to not notice Sakura's affection was waning from him, flowing back towards their raven-haired teammate. He brushed it off, thinking nothing of it, because he knew they both missed him very much, and it was only natural for her to be so willing to make him happy. That was exactly the way he felt one morning while on his way to Sasuke's to pick him up for their morning training. This particular morning he decided to arrive an hour earlier than their usual meet time, toting some breakfast for the both of them. He walked into the Uchiha district, looking around at the old buildings he passed until he finally reached his destination. He opened the front door and walked in as he always did, setting down the box with 2 covered containers of ramen. I know it's always quiet here, but damn, it's creepy walking in here alone, he thought to himself as he looked around the dim surroundings. As he made his way down the hall towards Sasuke's room, he noticed his bedroom door had a sound suppression seal above it, something he didn't remember being there from the many times he had entered his comrade's home. He glanced at the writing and could tell it was fairly new, with the chakra residue being so fresh. Truth be told, he usually would wait outside the front door for his teammate, but this time he was going to scare the heck out of him, since he figured he would still be sleeping. Very gently he gripped the doorknob, rotating it slowly while pushing the door open into a very tiny crack. As soon as he had breached the opening, his ears were filled with the sounds of tired breathing, a woman's moaning making the hair on his neck stand on end. He heard the sound of skin smacking against skin, and with the other sounds in mind, he was pretty certain what was going on. He smiled evilly to himself as he thought how much better this was going to be to jump out and scare Sasuke and his guest, thinking of his escape route while preparing to move. He moved his head to get a better look. Suddenly his heart skipped a beat, his blood rushing from his face and leaving him a sickly pale color. He saw Sakura on her back, naked with a Sasuke on top of her with her legs wrapped around his waist, pounding against each other, while she moaned as he impaled her over and over. With insane stealth and speed, Naruto was back outside, replaying what he just saw in his head, too shocked to register what he had just seen. And then it hit him. Give us blood, you know what you have to do. The Kyuubi gripped his heart and squeezed. He had to hurry before he lost all control. As he ran to the farthest possible training ground away from the village, he could feel the rage bursting inside him, tearing at his insides while trying to escape and be used to decimate anything that got in his way. He kept remembering the kiss he shared with his cherry blossom that night, the happy moments with her being shattered right before his eyes. As he arrived to the training ground a few miles outside of town, he finally felt his own killer intent rolling off of him, wave after disgusting wave of pure anger. Kill them, they're laughing at you, everyone's laughing at you, the fox's voice swirled in his head, laughing manically at what he too also witnessed only moments ago. He could feel the demon beginning to establish control over him, though he was resisting the tainted power with all his might. I'm running out of time. Naruto created a shadow clone and started forming Rasengans as fast as possible, destroying the landscape as he screamed at the top of his lungs. The demon struggled fiercely to make the blonde his puppet, but the rapid loss of chakra would inevitably fail him if he didn't hurry. Naruto could taste his blood as he bit down on his lip, pausing for it briefly as he gathered as much chakra from his reserves as able. He pushed his chakra into one last Rasengan, forming it into an Adoma Rasengan, hoping he wouldn't die from the power he wielded so recklessly. He jumped to the base of a small cliff and launched a blue sphere into a rocky wall in front of him, destroying every bit of it in his wake. The shadow clone disappeared and he fell to his knees gasping for air. I won't lose control like this again, I can't trust anyone. He felt his mind slipping away, the tension forcefully leaving his overworked body. I must never love again, he vowed to himself and promptly passed out, falling down on his chest from chakra exhaustion. Blackness enveloped the blonde as he was covered by the rock debris from the destruction left in his wake. Chapter 2. He grudgingly opened his eyes. Darkness smiled back at him. Naruto could feel the cold earth weighing him down, jagged pieces of stone jutting in all directions, even gouging into his body. The cold inky air was almost soothing after all that had happened to the blonde demon vessel. Slowly, he recollected how he had got into this painful situation, wincing as the ghastly knowledge sprung forth from memory. In the end it would seem he was right. He had foreseen that perhaps it was a bad idea to get involved with his teammate, but his heart yearned for someone to accept him and maybe one day learn to love him. He always had Haruka, Kakashi and his other friends to help him get through his problems, but there was one place in his heart that they couldn't fill. She was it. After that first kiss he was addicted to her. He couldn't stop thinking about her, and she in return was captivated as well. It had been almost 6 months since that first kiss, all the while keeping their relationship a secret from the village, except for their closest friends and their senseis. Still, Naruto never allowed their affection to be public. Whenever she objected he always explained it was his own way of protecting her from the terrible judgment of the village. As time passed, things were starting to get more intimate as the days drew on, each exploring the other's body and becoming more comfortable with one another. He knew it would be wrong to rush things since he was also inexperienced himself, so he was fine with the slower approach of their physical relationship. When they celebrated their 5th-month anniversary, Naruto had bought her a golden locket with both their pictures inside it. Her gift was a unique kunai made out of obsidian, almost too sharp to touch bare-handed. While he held the strange blade, his lover whispered in his ear that the next anniversary she had a special surprise for his present and that it would be the best one yet. When he asked what was so special about it, she only answered him with a sexy wink and a chaste kiss on the lips. The scene of the heartbreaking act he had witnessed suddenly played inside his head, a new realization taking root that he had missed earlier that day. She was wearing his locket. He couldn't control himself as he emptied the contents of his stomach onto the ground beneath him. His breath shuddered harshly, trying his best to keep himself calm. Hastily recovering, he pushed chakra into his feet and leapt through the debris, landing a few feet from where he was lying moments ago. Free from the black cocoon he could see it was now nightfall, moonlight barely illuminating the area around him. He felt relieved no one was there, hoping no one may have detected his chakra signature when he was demolishing the earth with the insane amount of energy he used. The training ground he had chosen was almost 5 miles outside the village, barely used by anyone other than himself. As he stood up straight he looked himself over, noticing his cloths were now completely ruined from all the holes and cuts covering almost every inch of him. For some reason his mind just seemed to go numb, no hatred, sorrow, or happiness could claim his mood. After look at the damaged landscape one last time, he began the long walk back to his tiny apartment. He reached the village's outer walls almost an hour later. He jumped up the wall into the inside and landed in the village's trading district. Walking with the dim orange light of the street poles shining down on him, he was pleased it was late in the night, so no one could see him like in his current state. Soon he saw his apartment complex came within sight, but he also noticed a figure sitting on the first floor steps leading to his own room. The figure seemed to notice his arrival and slowly made the descent down the steps. After a few minutes the blonde could see it was his sensei that had been waiting for him. They both stopped walking when within a couple yards of each other. Kakashi's visible eye widened when he noticed the condition of his student's clothing. "Where have you been, Naruto?" The boy's bowed head rose slightly, letting out a brief sigh. "I was training." His voice echoed the once brooding Sasuke. "We have been looking all over for you," Kakashi said. They both stood in silence. After a minute, he began again. "I heard about what happened." Instantly the boy's head shot up to look his sensei in the eye, preparing to read the reaction of his next question. "Did you know it was going on?" the blonde whispered. He bore a hole through his team leader's head, the look in his eyes being ready to kill the man standing in front of him. "No." The response was the one he was hoping for as he allowed his killer intent to recede into nothingness. Naruto took a few steps until he was next to his sensei. "If what you say is true, I'm sure Bachan is still awake wondering where I am. I want you to tell her I wish to speak with her early tomorrow," Naruto said. After pausing for a moment, he looked up at his sensei's face. "Good night." Kakashi nodded slightly before slowly walking away. The Jounin suddenly disappeared in a puff of smoke and was gone. The blonde reached the bottom of his stairs and slowly ascended to his floor, each step creaking loudly after the former. Briefly shuffling for his keys, he found the correct one and opened his door. The old hinges screeched as he shut it closed behind him. He walked in without turning on his lights. He definitely did not wish to be bothered right now. He guided himself around the few pieces of furniture he owned and entered his bathroom. Turning on the light, he allowed his eyes to adjust and then quickly undressed, jumping in the shower to rinse off. What did I do wrong? That very question played over and over in his mind as the hot water beat down on him from above. He kept thinking of all the possible ways he could have changed the way the relationship developed, but they all came back to his original question. Most of his body may have recovered, but his head would not stop throbbing. He got out of the shower and dried off quickly, getting dressed into a pair of black boxers with a white t-shirt. Maneuvering around his apartment, he made it to his hidden stash in the kitchen and pulled out an unopened 750ml bottle and a tiny saucer. He crept back to his kitchen table and sat down, removing the lid from his newfound spirits. The glass forgotten, he chugged down the bitter liquid until about a quarter of the bottle was gone. He set it down lightly on the table, letting out a loud gasp from the hard taste. "I know you're in here and unless you have a death wish, you better show yourself." The words came out harsh and quick to the point. He watched as the silhouette rose from his couch, making its way to the table. The moment it sat he could immediately make out the features of the figure before him. It took all the power in his being not to do something very drastic when he realized who it was. "Hi," she said. Her voice was scratchy and croaked. He couldn't see her face, but he could tell she had been crying. A long silence ensued after the brief greeting, and they both sat there, the shake beginning to take its effect. "I know you're probably very angry at me right now, you have every right to hat. How long?" His voice was monotone, as if the very soul that filled his words had been forcibly pulled out. "How long what?" The sound of her confusion violently assaulted his will to not go completely ballistic. Luckily for both of them, the alcohol was steadily flowing into his bloodstream. "How long have you been fucking him?" That time he couldn't control the venom that coated his words. Before she could answer, he took another swig from the bottle and slammed it on the table, earning a slight jump from his weary guest. "We've been seeing each other for almost 2 weeks. I wanted to tell you sooner, but How long?" he screamed, pushing himself to his feet with his arms bracing on the table, balancing his slightly wobbly self. For a split second his eyes flashed as though a blue flame lit inside his sapphire orbs, but quickly his gaze returned back into a ghostly haze. He listened for her answer as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, hearing her breathing stutter. "It was our first time," she whispered, barely making a sound. He slumped loudly back into his chair. Hot tears poured out as she quietly wept in the dark apartment, sobbing uncontrollably. Suddenly she heard something she wasn't expecting, something that threw her off completely. She slowed her sobs and listened as his body shook slightly across the table. He was laughing. It started as a very light chuckle, but soon developed into a disturbing laughter as his body lightly rocked into it. After a slight pause he looked up at her form in front of him, the look he could only imagine as confused covering her features. "Happy 6-month anniversary," he said in a flat tone as he took another gulp from the bottle, leaving barely a third left. She looked over towards his couch and saw the alarm clock's digital numbers showing it had just struck midnight. She stood up suddenly. "Naruto, please, I'm so sore." A sake bottle shattered against the wall, covering the living room with shards of glass and its mind-numbing contents. "Get the fuck out." Though his words held no real threat, the feelings behind them implored her to leave at once. She took a step back as the tears continued running down her face. She stood with her feet paralyzed as her wails grew louder. "Now." His chakra flared as he screamed at the woman before him. She quickly ran out of his apartment, the sound of glass being trampled following in her wake. Waiting a minute to make sure she was gone, he stumbled out of his chair into the living room to turn on the light to clean up mess. When the light came on he saw all the pictures of them around his apartment, decorating the walls and tables alike. He slouched down and picked one up from his dresser, remembering he took the photo a week ago with her at the Hokage monument. She stood in front of him in the picture, his arms wrapped around her waist, his face held by her arm, pushing them cheek to cheek. She was seeing him still pretending to care about me. He clutched the picture until the frame began to creak, finally breaking as the glass cut viciously into his hand. He snapped. He threw the deformed frame at the wall. The blondes staggered all over the apartment, ripping their pictures off the walls and throwing them wildly in every direction. He picked up his couch and launched it at the kitchen wall, the drywall bucking into a huge hole leaking plaster onto the ground. He thrashed around and flipped over his dinner table, crashing it to the ground. His eyes blazed with infernal rage as his happy memories with her played over and over, with an almost transparent scene playing behind them of seeing Sasuke and her committing the sin. He reached into his kunai pouch for an explosive tag when his fingers touched something he had forgotten. He pulled out the special obsidian kunai she had given him for their 5th-month anniversary. He rotated it, watching it reflect in the light, the dark blade shining even brighter than he thought he could see in his befuddled state. With surprisingly ease, he fused the fox's chakra with his own, covering the blade with an eerie purple glow. He slowly raised his hand and brought the sharp point to his right cheek. From under his eye, he stabbed the point into his skin, feeling the mixed chakras burning his flesh. The pain was inconceivable. But he had Sake on his side tonight. After the blade had come within an inch the side of his chin, he pulled it away, dropping the kunai on the ground. He struggled as he walked to the bathroom and opened the door, turning on the light and looking in the mirror. A moment passed as he ran his finger over the scar, feeling his handiwork. "Let's this be a remender," he slurred. He wobbled back into his living room, well, only room, making his trek to the bed. He literally fell into it, no longer able to control his balance. There he lay. Face down on the mattress, too drunk to move, too sad to care, too mad to cry. Before drifting his drunken slumber, he was certain he was going to go through with his decision. He was going to get away from this village. Chapter 3. The hungover blonde awoke to the sound of wind blowing in the trees outside his window. Among other things, he managed to break a window as well, allowing nature's voice to flow inside his tiny apartment. Looking at the clock that barely hung on the opposite wall, he noticed it was almost 10 o'clock, a lot later than he planned on sleeping. He let out a low groan as the rolled off his stomach onto his back. I forgot what happens when you almost completely drink a full bottle of sake by yourself, he thought groggily as he pushed his feet over the side of the bed sitting upright. He looked around, taking in his the mayhem of the night before wondering what he didn't break. He got up off the bed and strode to his full-in dresser, grabbing a pair of black cargo pants and a plain white t-shirt. After acquiring his clothing, he headed straight to the bathroom, hoping that by the time he was done with his shower, his splitting headache would be gone. Quickly jumping in the shower, he let the cold water rain upon him, trying to fight the urge of clatter his teeth. Turning off the nozzle after a quick rinse, he stepped out, grabbing the closest towel and dried off. Quickly getting dressed, he reached for his toothbrush to finish his routine when he suddenly noticed a folded paper tapped to his mirror. He grabbed the sheet and hastily opened it, skimming over the big text. "We need to talk." He recognized his raven-haired teammate's handwriting immediately. He let his arm drop to his side, letting the note drift away from his fingers. He hastily brushed his teeth, staring at the sink below him, trying not to think about what he just read. Although he was considerably calmer than the night before, he could still feel the after effects to letting so much of his emotions out in one go. He could probably kill someone right now if they pushed his buttons right, but at the same time his heart refused to release his sorrow. When he felt the Kyuubi begin its struggle for his consciousness, he didn't have time to cry, yet now that he actually had all the time in the world, he couldn't find it in himself to shed one tear. Finishing up, he walked to his front door, stepping over the broken furniture and shattered picture frames littered everywhere. After slipping on his shoes and locking the door, he was gone. The Hokage, along with her old perverted teammate and Kakashi, sat in the office in silence. She had learned the news yesterday morning after her student had barged into her office crying hysterically about Naruto. It took some time to calm her down from her incoherent babble, but after a while she slowed down and explained what happened. The Hokage wasn't very happy with her student, to say the least. Flashback. "What have you done, Sakura?" She stood in front of her with her arms crossed, staring daggers at her student. Her student stood under her towering figure with her head bowed down in shame. It had been almost 15 minutes of silence after Sakura had told her how she had been seeing Sasuke behind her boyfriend's back. Tsunade was pretty upset to begin with, knowing Naruto was probably devastated learning his girlfriend had been with Sasuke, but when she revealed how he found out, she accidentally did something on impulse. She slapped her across the face. Now they stood there, the red on her face was practically gone, considering if her sensei used her true strength, she may have decapitated her. Tsunade walked to her desk and sat down, still wondering how to handle the situation. "I'm sorry for slapping you, but I look at Naruto as my own son, and sometimes that clouds my better judgment," she said in a calmer voice. "What should I do, sensei?" She looked up at the medic nin with her puffy red eyes and tear-streaked face. The Hokage took a deep breath and then spoke. "You see, it's normal for these kinds of things to happen with young people. In fact, I would go as far as to say it's almost expected at some point. But this isn't under normal circumstances." She took a moment and then continued. "Naruto has been alone his whole life. Although he has found precious people who he loves and cares about, there was always a gap in his heart that deep down he was afraid would never be filled." She paused, letting the word sink in. "That gap was what you filled, Sakura. You alone were the one that he allowed inside, the one he trusted and who returned his love equally. In essence, you were what made him complete." Although she was trying to be gentle with her words, she could tell they were stabbing at her student's heart when she heard her begin softly crying during her explanation. "Now that you understand, try picturing what it would be like seeing the person who you love with all your heart giving away their virginity to your best friend, seeing it happen right before your eyes." She slowly rose to her feet, walking to her student as she fell to her knees in full force tears once again. She placed her hand on her shoulder and squeezed lightly. "I don't know what you should do." Then flashback. They were brought out of their silence by soft knocking on the door. "Come in," the Hokage announced. The door opened, revealing the tired young man they had been waiting for. He bowed slightly to his senseis and then positioned himself between them, standing in front of the Hokage's desk. The frog hermit shot to his feet, inching his face close to his student's, and sniffed loudly. "Have you been drinking?" Everyone's eyes visibly went wide as the blonde nodded solemnly. Tsunade slammed her hands on the desk, pushing herself to her feet. "So you think you're a big man now? Drinking your sorrows away?" She glared at him, but he wouldn't return it, his eyes just seemed to stare back, hers not reflecting his usual spunk. I'm sorry I upset you, Hokage-sama, but we really have more important matters to discuss. His expression remained blank as the room's other occupants' jaws dropped at his respectful response. She sat down, leaning back in her chair with her hands resting on the arms of it. Go on. He looked down for a moment as if gathering his thoughts and then raised his head and spoke. I request to leave the village for an indefinite period of time. As if she read his mind, she replied instantly. Request denied. The answer caused the boy to flinch for a moment before continuing. Will you at least hear me out? She waited a moment before silently nodding. After what happened yesterday, I'm afraid that for the safety of the village I cannot stay, at least not right now. My prisoner almost took complete control over me if I had not forced myself to pass out from chakra exhaustion. He took a breath and continued. I know what it wants, and if you let me go I can sate its hunger, but you need to let me leave here in order to do it. What does it want? Her voice peaked in curiosity. There was an awkward silence as the blonde shinobi looked down at the ground, his eyes covered with shadow. Blood. The word was laced with anger as his eyes momentarily flared red and then back to blue. After another long silence she spoke. I know you would never betray our village, Naruto, but I cannot allow you to leave. It's too dangerous with them waiting for the right moment to snatch you away. She sat forward looking him in the eyes. I'm sorry, but my answer is still no. She waited for him to respond in his usual manner but didn't get the response she wanted. He chuckled lightly before continuing. I knew you would say that, that's why I stopped by the council on my way here. She stood up suddenly, grabbing the neck of his shirt. What do you think you've done? She yelled at him with concern edging her voice. A very ghostly smile took his features as he spoke. I gave them the same request and they of course approved, immediately granting me Hunter Nin status until I choose to return. They also assured me if you tried to deny my request, they would use their yearly veto to overrule you. I'm sorry, but you can't make me stay. She glared deeply into his eyes as she slowly released his grip, slumping back into her chair. Do you think you can run away from the pain forever? The frog hermit spoke with a harsh voice. The boy's face slumped at the remark, accidentally allowing the hurt to come to his features. He quickly bottled back inside before answering. No, but I can at least keep myself from doing something I would regret, something that could endanger the village, something that even now I can't stop myself from lusting for. His arms began shaking with his fists balled at his sides. What started out as an almost mute grin began forming into a sinister smile as tiny trickles of blood left the sides of his mouth from his long canines, visibly piercing his lower lip. His eyes were engulfed in the fires of hatred as his killer intent seeped out of his being, causing the room's outer occupants to stand up and back away suddenly. He fell to one knee, grabbing the sides of his head, trying to keep the demons, or better yet demon, at bay until he finally gained back control, suppressing his demonic rage. He stood back up, trying to get his breath back, huffing, wiping the sweat from his brow. I can see you were not exaggerating, the gray-haired Jounin finally spoke. The older nin returned to their seats and silence once again followed behind them. Please Bach-an, let me go. I promise to return and have everything under control, I just need time to heal. He then paused, realizing an angle he didn't cover. If you're worried that Itachi and his goons are going to get hold me, I've learned one way to counteract Kyuubi's ultra healing abilities, by mixing his chakra with mine. The Hokage looked at him, confused at what he was getting at. How will that keep you safe from them? He put his usual fake fox grin on as he answered. If I am unable to defeat them, I'll end it myself. His voice was sickeningly sweet as the words rolled from his lips, the grin almost completely covering his face. She waited a moment before motioning to the other two to leave her and the boy alone. He stared down at the ground after the door closed, leaving them alone, avoiding remotely looking at her. I wish there was another way, he said quietly as he slowly raised his head to look her in the eyes. When his eyes reached her desk, he was startled, realizing she wasn't there. Suddenly he felt two feminine arms wrap around his chest from behind him, squeezing him in their embrace. He felt her face pressing against the top of head as drops of liquid began pouring into his hair. It's okay Naruto, you don't have to act around me, she squeezed tighter after he stiffened from her comment, trying to break her grasp. Let go of me, he said quietly, trying not be harsh. He could feel his shell fighting the urge to open. Her response was to only hold tighter. No, she answered simply, but felt his body begin resisting, trying to twist out of her grasp. Let go of me. He yelled, thrashing back and forth in her arms, but he couldn't break her hold on him. Let go of me. Please let go. Stop it. Stop it, please just let go. The hinge dropped from his face after losing all concentration, revealing the painful scar as his emotions flared. It finally happened, his shell completely shattered as he let himself fall back into her embrace, weeping lightly in her arms, getting louder and more desperate sounding every second. His knees gave out from under him as she guided him down to the floor, sitting behind him as he turned his head around, the sound of his sadness filling the room as he sobbed into her chest. And there they remained for a long time, her rocking him back and forth in her arms as he released his bottled up emotions into her loving embrace. Chapter 4. It was long after his emotional breakdown at the Hokage's office, the sounds of evening filling the night around him. When he recovered from his emotional downpour he told her he would be leaving that night even though she protested furiously. He didn't want to leave without saying goodbye to his friends, but in his heart he couldn't face them now, not like this. She kissed him on the forehead like she had so long ago, hugging him one last time trying to hold back her tears before finally wishing him off. On his way out of the tower he shook the hands of his old senseis, promising to return stronger and hopefully more patient with their perverted ways. Before leaving the tower he received a blank hunter nin mask, think of Haku's without any scratches or coloring, except for the leaf symbol, and a bingo book from a hunter nin he didn't recognize. The journey back to his apartment was uneventful luckily for him. He had managed to avoid all of his friends along the way, even having time for one last bowl of ramen at his favorite stand. When he returned home he began packing immediately grabbing all the clothing and other essentials he would need for his journey. The process didn't take long, and after double-checking his things he was certain he was ready. He debated cleaning his apartment but weighed the chance of it getting broken into while he was gone and being trashed by the villagers as a higher probability than it staying clean, so he left it alone. He walked to his door to depart when he stepped on a familiar photo on his way. He looked down picking up the broken frame staring at the faces of his teammates in the old Cell 7 photo they had taken so long ago. I can't hate you forever, but can I ever forgive you? He pondered to himself as he traced his fingers over the familiar faces. He took one last look before he broke the frame completely, taking the picture folding it, placing it in a pocket. He opened the door and locked it behind him, taking the first steps that would soon lead his last in his village for a long time. He stealthily made his way down the familiar path that his once traitor teammate had taken during their younger years in order to gain power. After his departure he noticed he was being followed but didn't want to make a move until he knew who it was. Sensing the familiar chakra he walked a few more minutes before stopping suddenly. Without turning around he spoke in a flat tone loud enough for his pursuer to hear. I know you're there Sasuke. The sound of his teammate landing a distance away acknowledged the truth of it. They both stood in silence as a gust of wind blew through their silhouettes, dying down as suddenly as it started. Naruto he was interrupted by the blonde shinobi raising his hand silencing him before he could continue. I know you wanted to talk, but I'm afraid tonight I'm going to be doing all the talking, understand? He said in his newfound apathetic tone. His response was a quiet HMPH which after hearing he paused and then continued. I'm leaving tonight for how long I don't not know, but I want to clear a few things with you before I go. He reached into his pocket pulling out an envelope, setting it down on a stone bench he was standing next to. Please give this to her for me. He said sighing looking up at the full moon staring back at him as its glow shined down on them. It's ironic I believe we are standing exactly where you and her spoke the night you abandoned the village. The current situation couldn't be any more different though he bowed his head chuckling lightly staring at the ground before him. Do you love her? The words came out more pained than he wanted, but he had to know. He felt his teammate's chakra flare a moment before it came back down to his normal state. Yes, his answer came in a truthful tone. Deep down he was happy for her sake that it wasn't just a fling for him, but the word also meant he was defeated yet again by his old rival. Allowing the answer to sink in he cleared his thoughts and then continued. If what you say is true, I will hold no grudge if you continue seeing each other, however I must say that I don't think things between us will ever be same again. I pray that in time I can learn to forgive you for what you did to me, for how you both deceived me without any thought to my feelings. His fists clenched before he released them momentarily. After a long silence he spoke again. Sasuke my teammate my best friend my brother he pulled out the exotic kunai he had received from his pink-haired beauty. If you ever cross me again his words sounded almost foreign with how much venom coursed through every syllable. He gripped the blade, squeezing it in his hand as blood began to trickle from his fist dripping silently to the ground. He turned around suddenly facing him with his eyes transformed by Kyuubi's putrid malice, his long canines barred at him in a fierce snarl. I'll kill you. Sasuke fell to his knees trying to catch his breath, the killer intent forcibly causing paralysis in his legs as the cold fear swept over him. After a minute of desperately trying to calm himself he looked up noticing the demon vessel's face had returned back to normal. He slowly rose back to his feet after recovering his composure. The demon vessel turned around facing his back to him once again. I may not be able to keep our promise if Itachi tries to come after me, but I will do my best to keep my word. He adjusted his backpack straps, placing the bloody kunai back into his pocket. Goodbye Sasuke he then began walking. He heard the raven-haired boy approach his position and pick up the letter off the bench and then turn around walking the opposite direction. Chapter 5. The masked hunter Nin looked over his village covered in the moon's vast glow, his senses assaulted by all the familiar smells and sights. He jumped from the roof he had stood on, landing silently to the sandy road below. The night was filled with the sound of chirping insects and the wind sailing through the grass and trees around him, almost as if calming the blonde shinobi. He reached under his mask, running his fingers over the dark scar he inflicted those years ago, feeling the pain pulsating from it like some sickening heartbeat. Flashback. It was almost 2 months since he left the village. He had been on the trail of a random missing nin he had chosen in his bingo book and was certain he would find him at any time. At first he missed the village after leaving it without barely saying goodbye, but as time went on he was beginning to enjoy being alone. To him it was peaceful. He stood up in a tree looking over the area until he spotted smoke in the distance rising over the tree line. He cautiously approached the immediate area until he was within a few hundred feet from what appeared to be a campfire. He drew a kunai and snuck closer, trying to see if the missing nin was indeed the camp's occupant. He stopped after getting within a few yards. He could see an old bald man curled up next to the fire, breathing softly in what appeared to be a deep sleep. He then tiptoed very slowly within a few feet of said old man, leaning down, peering at the old man's face. "I know you're there, young man." The voice caused Naruto to jump back in the air, dropping the kunai at his feet. The old man slowly opened his eyes, briefly eyeing the kunai that fell before him. "So you're here for my bounty, huh?" he said in a flat tone. The blonde just stared at the man in front of him as he sat up on his knees, looking back at him. The man looked like he was in his late 50s. He wore a plain white kimono with a black sash with ninja sandals, though his clothing looked quite weathered from who knows how much traveling he had done. "You aren't the first of the many hunter nin I've silenced over the years. What makes you think you can take my head?" The older man stood to his feet, waiting for his would-be attacker's response. The masked nin shrugged, looking down at the fire, watching the flames crackle and dance. "It's a win-win situation for me," the boy said after a long silence. The old man stood baffled, truly confused by the statement. "What exactly do you mean by that? If I kill you, how exactly is that winning?" He stared at the boy like he was some sort of special needs ninja. "Inside me is sealed the Kyuubi no Kitsune, and as long as I live it lives. When I die it will die. If I defeat you tonight there will be one less missing nin, and I can continue down the list, but if I die, then Kyuubi will be dead, and there will be no chance of him being free to murder and pillage this land ever again." He paused, grabbing another kunai, getting into a fighting stance. "So you see, I have nothing to lose." The old man stared at him dumbfounded. The hunter nin's argument was compelling. However, he was leaving out one detail. "What about your dreams? And your friends and the people you care about? I'm sure there is someone out there, someone you love." The boy visibly flinched at the mention of the word love as it left the old man's lips. Another silence claimed the night as he watched the boy in the fire's light. The blonde readied himself again. "I'm done talking. If you're going to fight then get ready. One thing is for certain, and that is one of us is not leaving here alive." The boy walked slowly in his battle stance towards the geezer. Before he knew it, the old man flashed in front of him, grabbing the hand that held the kunai, twisting it out of his hand and punching him square in the face with other, knocking him flat on his back. The blonde flipped backwards on his hands to his feet but again was knocked back down to the ground, this time with a kick. The speed and damage the old man is inflicting has to be over Jounin, maybe even close to Hokage level. The boy thought as he pushed himself to his knees. Again the man appeared before him, this time grabbing him by the neck, lifting him off the ground as its feet dangled for something to touch. With his free arm he pulled out a katana from behind his back the blonde had failed to notice, positioning it so he could stab it through his heart. "It's strange, but I almost feel like you're letting me do this to you, but no matter, I want to see your face before I end your existence." He flicked his katana into the side of the hunter nin mask, knocking it away with ease. The old man shuddered. He dropped the boy to the ground, staring at him like he wasn't real. The boy's face was, for lack of a better word, defeated, staring in front of him as if he was focusing on something in the distance. "You really don't care, do you?" The boy looked up momentarily, locking eyes with his target but made no acknowledgement towards him. After a few minutes the missing nin sheathed his katana to his back, taking a step forward towards the boy. The blonde finally looked up, a questioningly look plaguing his features. "Aren't you going to kill me?" The man shook his head, helping the boy to his feet. He took a step back, staring the boy in the eyes. "You're not like the others, I can tell just by looking in your eyes. Why are you doing this?" After a brief moment the boy explained how he had almost lost control of the demon inside, seeing the woman he loved with all his heart cheating on him with his best friend, telling him how since that day the demon's thirst for blood began making him become mentally unstable. After almost an hour of telling his story they both stood there in silence, the old man seemingly letting the word sink in. "What is your name?" he asked him, watching the boy reach down, picking up his mask, staring at the ground. "Uzumaki Naruto." He looked up at the missing nin. "And you are?" The geezer scrunched his wrinkled face, making an odd smile. "Hirashi Kane." The man paused after saying his name, smirking at the boy. Wait, you came after me without even knowing my name? What kind of hunter nin are you?" The boy's usual ball of energy anger surfaced suddenly, waving his fist at him. "Hey, I am new at this, give me a break." He then stopped suddenly. "What do we do now?" At that moment he remembered the only reason he was alive was because the old man had decided not to kill him yet. He cringed momentarily, getting prepared for him to attack, but ceased when he saw the man smile again. "I'm not really a missing nin. Me and my clan were banished and hunted down when we refused to collaborate in an attempt to destroy a smaller allied village. Because of that, I am now the last remaining member of my clan." His face took on a somber tone as he stared down at the ground. "I know how you feel, I'm the only person left in my clan, I don't even know who my parents were," the blonde's face mirroring the others. "Why didn't go to another village and join them in order to protect yourself from the hunter nins?" The old man raised his head, chuckling on the inside at the concern in the boy's voice. "I'm assuming you didn't read the bounty that is on my head as well, take out your bingo book." The blonde did as he was told, flipping back to the page where he saw the man's face. His reaction was unique to say the least. "What? You could build your own hidden village with that much money?" The old man nodded in response. "That's why I couldn't go to another village, you can't trust anyone with that much money hanging over your head, and to be honest, I don't think I could resist it either." The blonde put the bingo book back in his pouch, looking up at the sky. "I have been running from hunter nins for almost 20 years now, waiting to find the right person to pass on my clan's techniques before I leave this world. I was beginning to think I wouldn't find him until tonight." The boy eyed him confused, scratching his head. The man put his hand on his shoulder, looking the boy in the eyes with a genuine smile. "I'm choosing you to carry on my clan's legacy." The hunter nin's eyes widened to the size of saucers and then receded back to normal. Suddenly the blonde shinobi's eyes lost their light, the sadness seeping back into his features once again. "What makes you think I'm worthy?" Kane saw his mood change, realizing maybe it was a bit much for him to take in without revealing his reasons. "I can see the pain in your eyes, the sorrow that has gripped your heart and squeezed it shut. It's that pain that we have in common, the feelings that bind you into the man you are." The blonde nodded very slightly. "I can also see the good in you, the purity of one who lives his life for others and not for himself. You are a man who only seeks power to protect his precious people, a man who cannot be tainted by the lust for power. I know that in your heart you will not use what I teach you for evil." The man squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. The boy looked up at him, trying to smile as best he could back at him. Kane was pleased to see him cheer up, he knew he had made the right choice. "Then that's settled then. Follow me, I'll take you to my hidden home." The man turned from him, walking towards the dense trees that surrounded them. The blonde followed suit, walking next to him. "By the way, if you're so good at evading hunter nins, how did I find you so easily?" The old man looked down at him with a mocking smile. "Who said I didn't know you were there? And for that matter, who said that maybe for the last 2 weeks I've been purposely leading you towards my home?" The boy looked back at him, shocked. So he had this plan from the beginning. There they walked, together in the pale moonlight. A master with his new apprentice. Then flashback. He gripped the hilt of his katana as the memories of the old man he had befriended barraged his mind, his head swimming in anguish as the scene played in his head of the last time he was with him, the last time his grandfather figure was of this world. He quickly suppressed his emotions, pushing them away like the rest of his twisted memories, the scar seemingly radiating pain as the process took place. And before he knew it, he had sealed them away, the intense pain settling to a tolerable level from his ragged scar. Something caught the corner of his eye after he had recovered moments later, a small figure huddling in an alley right next to him. Taking a few steps, he entered the alley, getting a better look at what appeared to be a child. It was a young girl no older than 4 or 5 with filthy black hair going down to her mid-back, obvious the girl had probably not bathed in a long time. He looked down, seeing she was barefoot, the light blue kimono she wore almost reduced to rags covered in grime. The girl was shivering from the cold air, looking down at the ground with her knees in her chest. The blonde hunter nin took a loud step, making his presence known to her. She looked up at him with her tired brown eyes, staring at the masked person before her with a look of pleading mixed with fear. He realized that perhaps wearing the very mask that was usually reserved for his victims' last images of this world was not good for trying to comfort a complete stranger, that being a young child. He then took it off, slowly revealing his face. Wordlessly they stared into each other's eyes in silence, both keeping a piercing gaze locked on one another. The blonde shinobi felt his stomach lurch as her eyes told him her life struggle. "Her eyes are the same as mine," he concluded sadly. It took all his willpower when he was her age to keep him from losing grip on his emotions, having been openly scorned by the villagers, but to see this girl in the same pitiful state was almost too much to bear. He knelt down in front of her, sickened when he realized she was frightfully scared that the proximity of his presence. He then put on the best smile he could muster for the troubled child. "Hello little one, I'm not going to hurt you or do anything bad, I'm here to help." She looked up seeing his smile and visibly calmed down. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a nutrient bar and ripped the top open, holding it front of her. She eyed the food in his hand that was held before her, almost as if she was considering whether or not if it was real. After a moment's hesitation she speedily snatched it from him, eating it like a starved dog. The blonde winced seeing how hungry she must have been and waited while she finished. He pulled out his canteen from his back belt pouch and handed it over which she eagerly took, drinking the entire contents. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto, it's a pleasure to meet you." She looked up at him blankly, holding her knees in front her once again. "Can you tell me your name?" he said slowly as she continued to stare at him with the same vacant expression. After a few more minutes he decided until she was comfortable enough to talk with him and was ready he would wait. He took off his jacket and lightly draped it over her shoulders. Although she flinched he was happy to see her shivering beginning to recede. "I would like take you to the hospital and get you patched up and get some hot food in ya." He stood up to his feet, reaching down with an open hand. She still seemed a bit uneasy with this newfound caring from the blonde stranger. "I promise I'll keep you safe." He allowed a genuine smile to take his features. He wasn't going to let this girl suffer the same rough childhood he had to endure. It was now his personal mission to make her truly smile and be happy, the things he faked all those years ago, in order to not let the village know they had won. She took his hand and he pulled her up, in quick motion carrying her bridal style. Although she seemed uncomfortable at first, she slowly huddled into his chest, laying her head against his heart and drifting into a deep slumber. He adjusted her for a moment so he could put his mask on and then jumped on the nearest roof, making his silent advance to the hospital. Before long he was in the hospital's lobby talking to a young nurse he ran into upon entering. After a brief exchange he handed the girl over and followed the nurse to a vacant room and sat outside, waiting till she was finished getting her cleaned up and changed. He noticed the hospital was relatively quiet at the time, looking around seeing only a few people on staff. It was not his first visit to the hospital nor probably his last, but the same feeling of dread crept up his spine at being in the one place he loathed. After almost 30 minutes the nurse came out, motioning him to join her for a chat. "I'm happy to say that she is in stable condition, although she has suffered from a bad case of malnutrition and the beginning stages of pneumonia. To be honest, if she had come here a week later we may not have been able to reverse the damage." The blonde chakra flared from the sad facts. He would definitely find out why she was all alone on the street if he had to beat it out of someone. "I found her alone in an alley next to the main gates. I have no idea if she has parents or even a home." The nurse nodded. "Can I see her?" he said politely. She motioned him to follow her and they walked into the room, shutting the door quietly behind him. There in the middle of the room she lied on the hospital bed covered by a sea of blankets. He could see a few tiny tubes connected to her arms, probably pumping nutrients and other medicines to help her, he concluded. Her face and hair were no longer matted with grime and filth, making her appear to be like an almost completely different person. He walked next to her bed, watching her chest rise and fall with every breath. She looked truly peaceful as it seemed to calm the blonde as well just looking at the child. He reached up removing his mask, attaching it to his belt firmly to his side. The young nurse saw his face and almost audibly gasped. His eyes had a similar shadowing around them like the sand's Kazakiage. He scrunched them naturally as he looked bleary-eyed at the sleeping girl below. He looked back at the nurse, pausing momentarily seeing the look on her face. "It's okay, my eyes naturally always look like this. I have trouble sleeping." She smiled understanding and he then continued. "Can I stay here for a while?" She looked back at him recovering from her surprised expression. "Yes, that's fine. It would probably be better if she sees someone familiar when she wakes up. I would give it a day or two and she will be ready to leave." He nodded in response. She bowed lightly and headed for the door. She turned around halfway through the doorway. "Would you like something to help you sleep?" The hunter nin looked up from the girl and smiled lightly, his exhaustion almost getting the best of him. "I wish it were that easy, but thanks anyway." With it she nodded and closed to the door behind her. He turned to the corner of the room and grabbed a chair and pulled it next to the bed, positioning it towards the top. He reached down and pulled the sheath of his katana from his waistband, adjusting it so he held it with one hand over his shoulder. And there he watched intently, over time becoming hypnotized by the beeping of the machines and the quiet sound of her breath. Early that morning a certain pink-haired medic nin was on her way to work, walking quietly through the morning mist. She had prepared for today just like any other day, doing her usual schedule of getting cleaned up and dressed for the new day. She paused when she reached the hospital, reminiscing the events that caused her blonde teammate to leave. Ever since Naruto had left the village things were not quite the same with her and the rookie 9+ team guy. At first no one knew why the blonde had left. When they asked the Hokage she responded saying he was having severe issues with his teammates and that it was up them to ask them whether or not they wanted to know the whole truth. Sasuke avoided the question like the plague. His rep was already bad to begin with after betraying the village, and he didn't need more dirt on him. Sakura resisted as well, at first saying it was none of their business, but after a while finally cracked, revealing the truth to their friends. Ino of course was mad that she lost her battle for Sasuke, but was also furious at how her best friend did it behind Naruto's back. The rest of the blonde's friends agreed that they were both completely and utterly disgusting for doing what they did to their loud-mouthed friend, but knew in their heart that he would be mad if they held a grudge against the guilty parties. After a few months things returned back to normal between them, although Hinata would no longer acknowledge Sakura's presence, ignoring her publicly if she was ever around her. Ironically, Sakura began to lose interest in Sasuke, and after a month she broke things off, saying that she had made one of the biggest mistakes of her life. Sasuke would never be capable of truly loving someone, she had discovered, always letting his goal of killing his brother cloud his every waking thought. And from that day on she remained single, the guilt of allowing herself to be seduced by her old lust for the breeding Uchiha taking its toll. She walked through the doors of the hospital, spotting the previous night's nurse shift leader and getting the current patient medical updates, and to relive her. After 15 minutes or so the pink-haired medic Nin was up to date with all the necessary information. The nurse thanked her for her relief and began to walk out the doors, but stopped suddenly, turning back around. "Oh, I almost forgot, about 5 hours ago a tall hunter Nin came in with a sick child that he found on the street. Could you go check up on them first to see if she's doing okay?" The man was very nice but looked extremely tired, and it would be good if he could get some sleep, he's been there by her side since they arrived. Sakura nodded, waving goodbye, and flipped open her patient's list from her metal notebook, spotting the girl's room number. She headed over there, looking through the windows at the other patients, briefly making sure things were fine on her way. After a few minutes she reached the room listed where she would be staying. She reached for the handle, preparing to open the door, not knowing that unlike most days, this day would prove to be far from ordinary. Chapter 6. As the door creaked open as she peeked her head inside. The window's curtains were dropped down, keeping all outside light at bay, with the only luminescence being a small lamp facing the patient at her bedside. She looked around the room expecting to see the person who was accompanying the patient, but found no one. Closing the door behind her, she walked next to the patient's bed and grabbed her medical chart. Looking it over quickly, she set it back down and positioned her hands over the girl's chest. With a succession of quick hand seals, she activated her medical diagnostic jutsu and began her own evaluation. As she scanned through her body she couldn't help but feel as if something was amiss, like she had missed something. Her vitals are fine, looks as though her diagnosis was right on. All she needs now is rest, and she should be fine in no time. She deactivated her jutsu and looked down at her patient's face, noticing how utterly relaxed it was. Being a medic Nin who worked at the hospital almost daily, she had seen a lot of patients sleep, but this one seemed different. She slowly let her hand glide over her face, wiping the stray strands away. "She's cute, isn't she?" The voice startled her as she suddenly backed away, looking towards the opposite corner. She spotted a silhouette rising from the floor into a standing position. The figure approached her slowly as he seemed to grab something from his belt, putting it on his face. A moment later he was on the other side of the bed, looking down at the child as well. "That voice, who is this person?" she pondered. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to frighten you." He looked up at her as she studied the mask he was wearing. "So he is Hunter Nin, although I've never seen a mask painted like that before." The blood-red coloring was a little unsettling, but it was the black streaks from the eye slits that intrigued her. "Then again, he is a Hunter Nin," she concluded. She smiled lightly at him. "It's okay, no harm done. But what were you doing in the corner?" "It's a habit. I heard you coming and wasn't sure who you were." She was in no way afraid of the man before her, but the emptiness in his voice was beginning to weird her out. She quickly looked him over, seeing he was considerably taller than her, clad in almost all black, except for the dark red sash he wore. She noticed he had a katana at his waist as well. "So where exactly did you find her?" she asked politely. "I came through the west gates last night pretty late. Before I got far I noticed something shivering in an alley near the marketplace. I brought her here." Right after the blonde sighed deeply as he reached down, running the back of his hand down her soft cheek. The young girl slowly opened her eyes, looking at the two people around her. "Hey you," the Hunter Nin said softly, poking the tip of her nose lightly with his index finger. At first her eyes seemed fearful, but upon seeing the masked shinobi her eyes softened. She quickly darted her eyes at her other guest. "It's okay, you can relax here," Sakura responded to his words, smiling brightly at the child, bowing her head. The raven-haired child looked back over at the blonde shinobi with her same expressionless face. He stood back up straight and looked up to the medic Nin. "I really need to be going now. I appreciate you coming in and checking up on her." The blonde bowed before her. He looked back down at the quiet little girl, briefly smiling under his mask. "I'll come back later this afternoon to check up on you, little one. If you're up to it maybe we can go for a walk when I return." He lightly ruffled her hair with his hand before turning to leave. He said quietly as he bowed his head lightly once again. He took a step towards the door but was quickly prevented from taking another. His eyes traced down to the little hand wrapped around his fingers, squeezing him tightly. His gaze followed along her arm, seeing the raven-haired girl sitting up rigidly in her bed with concern written all over her face. The pink-haired nurse had to stifle her own gasp, seeing how fast the seemingly emotionless girl grabbed the hunter nin at his notion of leaving. The blonde smiled lightly to himself before turning back to the girl. "Are you afraid I'm going to leave and not come back home?" The blonde emphasized princess in the best playful tone he could. He watched as she nodded very slightly in response. He took his hand back from her delicate grasp and reached into his belt pouch, pulling out a worn folded paper. He held it for a moment before taking her hand and placing it her palm, closing her fingers around it. "I want you to hold on to this for me. You think you can do that for me, Haim?" She nodded her head again as she brought the paper to her chest, holding it tightly. "I knew I could trust you. Keep it safe until I come back, okay?" She nodded again slightly before lying back down. He looked at the pink-haired nurse briefly before turning back to the door and walking to it. After he reached the door, he opened it halfway, taking a step out of the dark room. "It was nice seeing you again, Sakura." His voice seemed almost pained saying the last word. With that he was out the door, shutting it quietly behind him. "Just who are you?" She deeply considered for a moment. She walked to the windows and began pulling up the curtains, letting in the morning light illuminate the room. "After we get some of this nice sunshine in here, I'm going to go get your breakfast," she said in a bright, cheerful tone. When she cleared away the last window cover, she walked back to the bed, noticing the girl was sitting up staring intently at a small paper clutched in her hands. Her face had a look of genuine surprise which spiked the medic nin's curiosity. She walked back over to the side of the bed, looking down at the girl's startled expression and smiled. She then leaned over to take a peek herself. "You look like you've seen a GH." Her breath instantly hitched upon seeing the tattered photograph. Her heart raced as she ran to the door and flew outside into the hallway. She looked down both ways but it was too late. He was gone. He's back. The latent guilt in her heart threatened to resurface, but she quickly pushed the feelings aside. She grasped the locket she wore under her shirt, thinking about what all had just happened. She quickly gathered herself and opened the door back to the room. She walked back and slowly calming down as she approached her patient who was still sitting up. The girl looked at her like she was some sort of crazy woman as she held the battered Team 7 photo in her little hands. She walked next to the bed and sat down in the very chair he had pulled out earlier, slumping over staring blankly at the floor. Is he really back? Later, elsewhere in the village, a very non-morning person was sorting through a rather huge stack of mission reports and other documents strewn about her desk. She cursed inwardly at the amount of work she had put off yesterday that was now added to her already huge daily workload. She was brought out of her brooding thoughts by a soft knock on her door. "Enter." A young chunin came in shortly after her response, walking to her desk and bowing before it. "Okage-sama, there is a hunter nin who wishes to speak with you," he said politely. She looked up from her desk warily before nodding in return. "Send them in," she said as she rested her forehead on her desk. The chunin bowed and left the room, quickly shutting the door behind him. A few minutes later the door opened again and the hunter nin walked in, closing the door behind him quietly. As he slowly walked to the desk, as he heard her let out a deep frustrated sigh. "This better be important to be bothering me this early. I see you still hate your job with a passion." Botch, and the familiar name struck a chord in the blonde Hokage. Her face shot up from the desk in complete surprise as she peered into the mask of the tall hunter nin in front of her desk. Keeping her eyes on him, she walked around the desk to stand before him. She slowly reached her hand to his mask, grabbing the side of it and began lifting it from his face. With his face revealed, he looked down at her gaping eyes as she stared at him like he was going to disappear before her very eyes. "Well, I'm happy to see you." Before he could finish, she pulled him into a life-threatening embrace as she buried her face into his chest. He instinctively reached around and held her to comfort her as she sobbed into his chest. "Shhhhhshhhhhh," he cooed calmingly as he ran his hand through her soft blonde hair. He could feel her tears begin wetting his shirt as she wept into his chest. I thought you were dead," she cried, muffled into his shirt. He felt the guilt burrowing deep into his heart, seeing his motherly figure in such a wreck because of him. "I'm sorry for making you worry. If I could have written you, I would have," he said as he squeezed her into his chest as her breathing began to calm. After a few more minutes and tears, she craned her head, looking into his eyes with her own puffy red ones. She ran both hands to his face and gently pulled his head down to hers, smiling at her surrogate son. She stood on her tiptoes and laid a soft kiss on his forehead, letting her lips rest there for a long while. After a few more moments, she pulled her hands and stood back down on the balls of her feet. Not long after, she blushed intensely after feeling quite embarrassed about her emotional outburst. "Now sit down, you have a lot of explaining to do," she said in an almost pout as she turned from the hunter nin, returning back to her seat behind the desk. He quickly found a seat for himself before looking up at her. First off, I would like to give you Konoha's cut from the missing nins I took care of." As he said this, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a fat envelope overfilled with cash brimming out the top. He reached out and set it down on the desk and pushed it over to her. She looked at the money wide-eyed before reaching down and looking through it. "I see, so I take it you were pretty busy on your journey," she said in a flat tone. She looked up at the blonde and saw his face contort into a somber tone before quickly shifting back to his plain expression. She hadn't noticed until now how extremely tired the blonde's eyes truly looked. The dark shadows around his eyes almost seemed written onto him with how haggard they appeared. She watched him eye the ground before raising his sight back to hers. Upon seeing the Hokage's expression, he quickly put on the fake smile he had worn since his infancy. "You could say that," he whispered, wearing his fake smile. He instinctively felt the hilt of his blade as he sat in the brief silence. He reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a dirty worn black book and tossed it onto her desk. Upon inspecting it, the Hokage realized it was a bingo book. She opened the book and began turning the pages, looking at various pictures of missing nin from all over the shinobi lands, with X crossed over their faces. She quickly realized what they meant and was astonished at how many people he had taken out. She kept turning page after page until she came upon a picture of an old man who had no markings on his page. All she could see were the faint marks where droplets of water and stained the page in various places. "Couldn't find this one," she said as she turned the book for him to see. He looked up at the picture, instantly recognizing him, and looked back down at the ground. She saw his mood shift instantly and was thrown off momentarily. No, he was different. He almost whispered with shadows covering his features. He slowly raised his head as the light began revealing his features. He stuttered his last word as his voice trembled. "He was my master." Flashback. It had been almost a year since the old man had taken the blonde under his wing. At first it was slow. Being the boy had never wielded a katana in his life. But what the blonde made up in skill was his constant effort to become stronger. Not long after he had the basics down, the intensity of the training skyrocketed. Every day you could notice the teen becoming more in tune with the blade, as if it was an extension of himself. The old man realized early on that he was also lacking in many other areas and helped change that as well. He even assisted in helping suppress the Kyuubi's bloodlust until it was needed on the battlefield. On the side, he taught him many other things along with otherworldly knowledge that he neglected to attain while at the academy. They started out as complete strangers, but now one would think the boy was the old man's grandson if they were seen in public. Today was the day the master swordsman told the boy he would give his final test to see if he was worthy of his clan's teachings. There they walked in the wilderness, the old man ahead of him a few meters with the blonde following right behind. "So are you excited, kid? After today you won't have to deal with this old man pushing you around any longer," he chuckled lightly. The blonde raised his head, smiling at his back. "You got that right, Baldy, after today I will be number one," he yelled out in his usual hyperactive way. The bald man smiled inwardly before stopping in his tracks. The blonde followed suit and halted as well. "Naruto, I want you to promise me something before we begin your final test." The man remained facing away as he spoke. The blonde could tell immediately when the old man was serious and decided to do the same. "What is it, master? Promise me you won't hold back no matter what." The blonde was a little confused to say the least. "Why would I hold back, old man? I need. Promise me." The boy jumped suddenly at the tone his master rarely heard. Of course, master, I won't hold back." He watched as the bald geezer molded the stones around him into a katana with his chakra like he had done so many times before. But the old man turned to him, getting into his fighting stance. "As you said the night I met you, one of us is not leaving here alive." He flipped forward and did a powerful downward thrust as the blonde barely unsheathed his blade in time to block it. There they stood in a struggle against one another, fighting for dominance. "Oh, what are you doing, old man? You almost killed me." The blonde yelled as he gritted his teeth, trying to overpower his master. "This is real, boy. There is no holding back when your life is on the line." The elder flipped backwards a few yards before charging forth again, swiping at the boy at lightning speeds. The blonde was able to defend himself well enough, but he knew he couldn't keep this up forever. Suddenly his blade slipped and he was sliced into by his attacker's katana, lopping his arm right off. The blonde fell down still on the ground as the blood gushed out of his severed shoulder. "I know you're out there, you can stop with the act." As he spoke, the bleeding teen poofed into a smoke cloud, revealing a cut open log. He twirled around just in time to block a sideways slash as the blonde jumped behind him. The hunter nin took the offensive, swinging and darting his blade at rapid speeds at his elder. The geezer was forced back into a tree and ducked suddenly under another power slash as the tree behind him was cut in half by the sheer force of the blonde swing. He quickly stabbed at the boy's stomach, which the blonde turned to his side, narrowly being run through by his blade. Needless to say, both were beginning to match each other in the godlike performance of swordsmanship they unleashed upon one another. Around 45 minutes later. The two swordsmen stood with a large gap between each other, both panting for breath as they looked at each other fiercely. The blonde had many cuts along his arms and legs, bleeding lightly but nothing serious. The same could be said for old man, who even had a small gash near his forehead that kept bleeding into his eyes. The old man stood up straight, readying his blade for his final attack. "This is it, the final exchange, my young apprentice," the old man calmly stated. The blonde stood rigid, hearing the words he was afraid of. "Please stop this," he yelled at his master. He watched as the elder positioned the blade to his side, the point sticking behind him like as if ready to swing. The blonde mirrored his senior's stance to perfection, waiting for him to make his move. "Don't be afraid, this is how it ends." He then charged full speed with the sword stiffly at his side as he approached the blonde. Naruto watched him sprint and began running as well, both preparing for their own possible deaths. Time seemed to stand still as he got closer to his master. The air seemed to thicken around him. His heartbeat echoed throughout his mind as he watched the last seconds before they would strike. "I can't die here, not yet. Ah thump. Who will protect the village? Ah thump. Who will protect my friends? Ah thump, tha thump. They need me, I need them. Ah thump, tha thump, tha thump. No, I can't die here, I swore a sacred oath. Ah thump, tha thump, tha thump, tha thump. I will not end here. Ah thump, tha thump, tha thump, tha thump, tha thump. Until I become Hokage for them, all of them, I will not fall. Ah thump, tha 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 thump. You will die." The demon vessel closed his eyes, releasing an inhuman scream as he swung his blade with every particle of his being and more. Clang. The sound of the blades making contact echoed throughout the forest like a bomb had exploded. The impact made a mini shock wave as the grass and trees blew from the attack. Forest then became deathly quiet as the blonde shinobi awaited for death to take him. But death was fated to take another in his cold dark grasp. He began opening one eye painstakingly slow, wondering what really did happen. "I knew you could do it." His eyes opened wide upon hearing his master's struggled words. The hunter nin's blade had cut through his master's sword, going through and lodging into his side. He felt the blood begin to drip off his guard after it had made a dark crimson river down the entire length of his blade. "What have I done?" He quickly dislodged his blade as it clattered to the ground, catching his master in the process. There he cradled him in his arms as he sat down on the ground with him. His tears began to prickle their way from his eyes as he looked down at his master's calm expression. "Why did you make me do it?" he screamed, sobbing uncontrollably into his own chest. His master merely smiled as a tiny trickle of blood left his lips. "It hurts, doesn't it?" he said as he ran his feeble hand over the boy's scarred cheek. The boy grimaced slightly but made no effort to bat his hand away. His master lightly smiled as he let his hand fall back to his side. "Use the pain of loss to strike down your enemies. Now that you have felt its dark clutch on your heart, remember it well." He reached into his kimono and pulled out 3 large scrolls. With his other hand he grabbed the boys and put the scrolls into his hand. "These are my clan's jutsus that have been passed down for generations, now I give them to you." He coughed as another trickle of blood ran down his chin. "Tonight when I die, my clan will be no more, which is why I have decided you will carry on our legacy, though your own clan." He paused, looking up at the night-lit sky. "Do not fail your people like we did. Make sure you do what is right instead of running away." The boy nodded vigorously as he listened to his master's final words. "Master, I don't want you to go, please stay with me." The blonde fought with himself to catch his breath as he sobbed, looking down at his dying master. The old man looked back at his apprentice with a sad smile. He reached back and grabbed his hand and squeezed it tightly. "You have made this old man very proud." "But grandpa." The blonde suddenly flinched, realizing his choice of words. The old man only smiled wider, hearing the word he had never been called in such a way. He held the boy tighter as he felt his life force beginning to slip away. "If I ever had a son, he would have been you," he whispered to his blonde apprentice. The blonde's breath hitched hearing his master's words. Newfound tears spilled forth like a raging storm as he deeply hugged the dying old man. "Grandpa, stay with me. I don't want to be alone again, please don't go. Please." His desperate shrill voice rang out into the night. He looked up at his grandfather figure's eyes, seeing a lone tear roll down his cheek. The blonde gazed into his eyes as if begging him to live. "I will always be with you," he slowly smiled as another tear rolled down his face. His eyes dimmed slowly as they quietly drifted shut. The blonde became motionless as he stared at his master's face. All the memories of the old man seemed to invade his mind as he stared at the blood all over his chest in complete and utter shock. Suddenly the emotional backlash caught up with him, releasing a tidal wave of multiple emotions all at once. He screamed in complete agony as he backed away from his dead sensei. "Look what you have done!" The evil voice of none other than Kyuubi invaded his mind. "You're a murderer!" The voice laughed manically as the blonde hunched over in a mass of sobs and tears. The scar suddenly ripped open with a splatter of blood as the Kyuubi's chakra poured out of it like a disgusting river of hatred. The chakra began to envelope the boy as he fought for control with his evil tenant. He pushed himself to his feet as he staggered backwards, holding the sides of his head, yelling at the top of his lungs. He focused as hard as he could on the training he used to suppress the Kyuubi's demonic rage he had learned the first months he had arrived there. The laughing in his head began to cease as he could hear Kyuubi begin struggling against him. Slowly the chakra began receding back into his scar like a twister of evil, forcing itself back into his body. The blonde was beginning to feel relieved until he heard the laughing in his mind engulf his hearing yet again. "If you think this over, you are sadly mistaken," the voice laughed louder as the boy was getting closer to sealing all the evil chakra. "One day you will lose this struggle, and I will be there destroying everything you love and hold dear to your heart, you weak pathetic child." The voice was then cut off as he completely suppressed the demon's will. The blonde ran his hand over the scar, feeling the blood all over his face, feeling the newfound pain that would not stop throbbing from his scar. He looked down and picked up his bloody katana, wiping it clean on his sleeve, and sheaved it back to his waist. He walked to his fallen sensei, bending down and picking him up bridal style. He looked down at his peaceful expression before making the lonely trek back to his house. Then flashback. The Hokage listened intently as he finished telling the sad tale of events. He ran his hand over the scar, feeling it throbbing as his mind recalled that very dark day. They remained silent for some time as the blonde woman glued her eyes to her desk in thought. The blonde container looked up, putting on the best smile he could. "He was a great man that I will always remember. I will use what I have learned to protect this village and everyone in it." She looked up hearing the blonde's declaration. A genuine smile claimed her features and she looked teary-eyed at the young man she loved like her own son. "And when I become Hokage," he slowly rose from his seat, keeping his face covered in shadows. "I will ban all gambling within the Fire Country's borders," he yelled as he punched his fist in the air. The Hokage sweat dropped as she darted over her desk, knocking the blonde over the head. "You will do no such thing, brat. Acting all cool and adult-like and then saying something stupid like that," she yelled as she sat back down in her seat. The blonde rubbed his head from the intense bash she had received and sat back down. "Sorry about that, this seemed like one of the rare moments my old stupid antics seemed right," he said as he smiled lightly. She frowned at him. "I miss the Naruto," she said quietly. He looked up at her with tiny smile. "Me too." Then 3-chapter flashback, present time. The blonde shinobi released a long sigh after coming out of his memories. It had been almost 3 years since that day, the last time he had seen or spoke to anyone relating to the leaf. He was now a little over 6 feet tall, wearing an open black jacket with black tank top under it, accompanied by black combat fatigue pants with a crimson sash, along with black ninja sandals and black socks. I know, a lot of black. His forehead protector had many nicks and dints in it, but still kept most of its original luster, which he wore around his neck. His mask was colored completely red like blood, with 2 black streaks coming from the corners of the eye slits like tears down the sides of it. At the side of his waist hung a katana, the hilt being barely visible under the flap of his open jacket. His kunai pouch was tapped at the usual spot on his thigh, along with his ninja pouch behind him on his belt. His hair had grown more unruly and a few inches longer from before, swaying around as the spikes moved in the wind. He began walking until he reached the gate when suddenly Tuchunin appeared before him. "Welcome back, Hunter Nin, I hope your travels were well," one of the guards said as they stared at the man before them, waiting for a response before he slightly nodded, passing in between them. "Wait, we need to know your name before you go," one said, grabbing the Hunter Nin's shoulder. The Hunter Nin turned to him, staring blankly at him under his mask. "The Kyuubi container has returned." Chapter 7. The 2 blondes had covered quite a bit of ground in the 2 hours they had been in conference. She questioned him about his travels and other events that took place on his 3-year journey, which he replied most in a calm, collected voice. Akatsuki had not managed to be able to track him since his newfound evasion techniques he learned from his departed sensei, and because of that he had yet to face any of them during his travels. He explained how he himself now had a bounty on him by a group of missing nin, hence why he was unable to ride in fear they would retaliate against his precious people. After he thoroughly recounted his leave of absence, she took it upon herself to update him on the changes in the village. The rookie 9+ guy were all jounins at this point, except they all had varied roles with their new ranks. Sasuke, Niji, Lee, Choji and Kiba joined the Anbu together and formed their own squad, with the Uchiha being the leader. Shikamaru was asked if he wanted to join the squad as well, but he merely commented it was insert Shikamaru cliché here and decided to take his own genin team instead, go figure. Shino joined the interrogation department as Ibiki's prize protege, whose work had spread throughout the ninja nations, causing many to not risk the chance of being captured doing missions against Konoha. Sakura convinced the Hokage to allow Ino and Hinata, although the latter still held deep resentment for the Pinky, to join under her tutelage, and all three were now among the top 4 medic nins in the Fire Country, Tsunade being number 1. Of course they still went on missions occasionally, but the three used their seemingly natural medical talents to help at the hospital more often than ever. Fenton decided after passing her join-in exam that she would still do missions during the summer, but during the school year she would teach at the academy. Many asked her why she would take such a drop in pay and job title, which she always answered, "The future of this village is the youth, and I'm going to help mold it." After Sai became a jounin, he merely began taking more ANS rank missions, happy to be by himself again. She finished explaining and waited for his response. "Ah, I see, that's great news," the hunter nin stated with a ghost of a smile on his features. All the information was new to him, but he was only mildly surprised as he expected his friends would become stronger in his absence. "So what are your plans, Naruto? You're still a genin after all, and the next Chunin exam is months away." She expected to get a rise out of him, but he merely stared back at her impassively. "It really doesn't matter to me anymore. Although I'm confident I could pass the exam, I think I'll stay out of it. What my master taught me was not meant to be flaunted in a completion, much less in front of an audience," he stated calmly to the blonde before him. "So you're going to remain a genin forever?" Her voice utterly surprised. The demon vessel merely smiled lightly at her response. "Genin, Chunin and Jounin are all just as easily susceptible to death. You know how many Jounin I have slain without them even knowing what was happening." His eyes momentarily phased from their normal blue hue to that of ice. They quickly reverted back as he continued after a brief pause. "Those ranks mean nothing to me. As long as I attain the title that allows me to be this village's sole protector." He paused, reaching into his jacket, grasping the stone he wore. He stood from his chair and walked to the main window overlooking the village. Tsunade did not expect such a mature answer from her guest, but nonetheless she could understand his point of view. "I will talk to the council about the possibility of organizing a test that will not force you to reveal your new abilities to the public. Also, with this test you may be able to skip Chunin and jump right to Special Jounin, since your bounty record obviously shows you're more than capable. I can't break tradition and give you A&S rank missions if you're still a genin, so until then I want you to take a month of leave on the reserve duty roster." The blonde teen's head shot from the window in a heartbeat. "You can't be serious," his voice almost sounded upset. The Hokage's face dropped as she gazed into her surrogate son's blue orbs. "Naruto, you have been gone for over 3 years without even writing one letter to anyone from your home village. Why are you in such a rush to get away, friends and family?" She emphasized her last word as she too felt as if the young man wanted to distance himself from her. His face visibly softened, realizing how he may have sounded. He walked over to her desk and sat down on it right next to her. "It's not that I don't care about you or my friends, it's just that I'm not the same person anymore. Everyone is going to be expecting me to be wearing that fake face that I paraded around town all those years, except this time I can't even remember how to do it anymore." He patted his hand to her shoulder and squeezed it lightly. "I live so that I can keep a very important promise. All that matters is that you and everyone else are safe." He forced a smile, trying to dissolve her concerned face. Although his last words touched her heart, at the same time it pained her to see the boy she knew had changed so much. She put on a smile regardless. She stood up and ruffled his hair. "I understand, Brad, just make sure you stay here for good now. Also, could you try to lighten up? For me?" He smiled back at his motherly figure. "I'll do what I can, Bachan," he said quietly. Normally his disrespectful reference would make her crazy, but the fact he was so distant made every bit of familiarity precious. He stood up, walking towards her door. He reached down and picked up his mask that was discarded earlier and returned it to his face. When he reached the door he turned around. "I forgot to mention earlier, I found a little girl living out on the street last night. What I don't understand is why something like this would be overlooked in such a prosperous village." He frowned under his mask, recalling the feeble state he found the tiny child in. The busty blonde's features seemed to question his words, but she immediately schooled her features. "I honestly don't know how she was overlooked unless something happened. I'll send Shizune to the local orphanages and find out if they had any recent runaways. She left to inspect the hospital medical staff almost an hour before you came, so she should be back very soon." The blonde hunter nin nodded in return. When he was close to leaving he let out a brief chuckle. "Also, it's nice to see you too, Kakashi-sensei, Anko-san and Karani-san." He then disappeared into a swirl of leaves as the door closed instantly. The red-eyed Jounin dropped the Genjutsu, and the 3 Jounins were revealed in 3 corners of the room. "So he knew we were here the whole time and didn't say anything?" the copy ninja stated, scratching his head. The purple-haired Kunoichi merely smirked. "He's so tall now, I wonder if everything else has grown," she said in a husky voice as she licked her lips. The Genjutsu mistress merely shook her head at her fellow Jounin. "You haven't seen the boy in 3 years and that's all you can think about?" She let out a long sigh as he raised her head to the Hokage. It's hard to believe that he was the boy who painted graffiti all over the Hokage monument, Kurieni said in a low tone. The Hokage's face grimaced momentarily before taking on a confident smile. Don't worry, give it a little while, and he will be back to normal in no time, she beamed at the fellow occupants. Kakashi looked down at where the blonde teen had been sitting on the desk moments ago. I hope so, Hokage-sama. Iruka-sensei, I don't want to learn about the leaf exercise. A boy in his preteens yelled to his teacher. Iruka scrunched his brow looking at the boy in one of the back rows of his classroom. This generation was just like any other he had taught. Troublesome. He looked around the classroom seeing a large percentage of the other children scowling back at him. He looked back at the original troublemaker and let out an exasperated sigh. I'm just curious, Akiro, since you seem to dislike everything I try to teach you guys, what would you suggest we learn next? The black-haired student's face instantly brightened up at the notion of him choosing the class topic. Tell us the story about how Naruto-san saved Sasuke and brought him back to the village. As if the word Naruto was a code word for something, the entire class surged with life at the mention of the name. Yeah, sensei. Tell us how he helped save the Kazekage from those bad guys. Another boy said as he jumped up from his chair raising a fist in the air. Can you please tell us about how Naruto-kun saved Hokage-sama from that evil snake man? A girl said as she and many others began blushing and giggling almost simultaneously. The information regarding the blonde's exploits had spread shortly after he left for the second time. Most of the information regarding Akatsuki was censored, but the details of the battles were declassified to the Chunin and below, after many of the demon container's friends and supporters thought that perhaps allowing the public to know his deeds would shed new light on the boy. They couldn't be more pleased with the results. The scarred Chunin smiled at the excited displays of his pupils, thinking back about his blonde student. He was happy to say the least that his precious friend had gained so much support from the village after many villagers realized how foolish the hate was that they were harboring against him. He was brought out of his thoughts after hearing a faint knocking on the classroom door. Enter, he said as the door slowly began to slide open. The class was momentarily brought out of their musings as they watched the door inch its way to the side, revealing a tall masked blonde shinobi. Can I help you, Hunter-san? The Chunin said. He looked up and down the Hunter Nin feeling as though he felt somewhat familiar. He returned his eyes to the red mask he was wearing and noticed the distinct spiky blonde hair. Iruka-sensei, you're still making them learn that lame leaf concentration exercise. The masked nin's voice echoed in the classroom in a playful manner. The class instantly liked the man. Iruka on the other hand was utterly speechless as he tried to form the words he wanted to say. His mouth opened numerous times but shut almost in the same instant. The blonde reached to his face and pulled the mask off, revealing his angular tired features. The scarred Chunin eyes widened as the whisker marks confirmed his suspicions. There they both stared at each, one's face looking like a fish and the other's holding a tired rare guanine smile. The boy Akiro, still standing, looked at the tall shinobi and then back at his sensei, wondering what was going on. Why are you acting so weird, sensei? And who is that guy? The Chunin suddenly broke from his thoughts hearing his student's query. He looked back at his class, seeing the confusion-ridden features upon all their faces. He studied his old student and excitedly waved him over to come in. Everyone, I would like to introduce my favorite student, although many of you already know who he is. The brown-haired Chunin smiled mischievously at his students. The few that had made outbursts earlier glared at him in response. His grin widened as he watched them ponder the Hunter Nin's identity. The blonde walked into the class looking over the young academy students. He was surprised to see many of the girls were blushing and even more surprised that quite a few boys were staring at him with awestruck expressions. He put on a decent smile as he turned to face the class. For the record, it was Bach-an who saved me from that snake bastard. I just happened to beat the crap out of Kabuto with the 4th seconds technique before that. He closed his eyes, scratching the back of his head out of embarrassment. The sound of squealing girls brought him out of his musings as he covered his ears. He opened his eyes, seeing a horde of students filling out of their rows towards him with rabid looks in their eyes. He looked back at his old sensei for help, but he merely smiled evilly at the blonde's plight. He felt arms tugging at all his sides as the girls fought for the best place to latch on to the blonde's waist. The boys on the other hand stood looking up at him starry-eyed like he was some sort of royalty. He tried to keep up but soon was overcome by the many questions launched at him. Naruto-san, is that a real katana? Can I see? Owing and awing filled the room. Is it true you developed your own technique that could incapacitate the 3rd Hokage? Haruka slapped his forehead at that one. Cool mask, Naruto-san. Can I wear it? Owing and awing filled the room once again. Do you have a girlfriend, Naruto-kun? Giggles and squealing deafened the room's occupants. The blonde Hunter Nin stared baffled at all the bright young smiling faces around him while trying to understand why they knew so much about him. A rare glimmer of happiness entered his heart seeing the student so captivated by him, but that feeling was quickly lost after a sad realization. He inwardly sighed knowing the cold hard truth. They did not know what was sealed inside of him. The classmates' faces all scrunched in confusion seeing the blonde sleep-deprived eyes stare off into space. Haruka noticed as well and decided to step in. I'm sure Naruto would love to answer all your questions, but perhaps later would be better. After all, he has been away from the village for over 3 years and probably needs some rest. The students all sighed in desperation. The blonde looked up at his old sensei with true gratitude at his quick save. Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and let class out early today. Saying the mood of the children going from disappointed to excited would be an understatement. Before they could run out, Haruka quickly squashed their hopes of complete nirvana. You better be ready for tomorrow though, we are going to do double the work to make up for today. He yelled with a guy-like pose and smile. The mood went back to disappointed in a heartbeat. They all filed out of class saying their goodbyes to their sensei and blonde demigod, and soon enough the two were alone. The blonde looked down at his feet trying to put together the proper words to explain himself. Let's see, I catch Sakura sleeping with Sasuke and almost lose control of Kyuubi, then I leave the next day for 3 years without saying a word or explanation, and don't say goodbye to the one of the first people to accept me for who I am. The guilt began to manifest inside of him, wondering if his first parental figure would be able to understand why he left without a word. Silence crept upon them as he continued contemplating any string of words to begin his explanation. Haruka-sensei, It's okay Naruto. The blonde raised his head to his old sensei as the guilt claimed his features. To his surprise the Chunin was smiling back at him. I heard what happened, I myself don't know what I would have done in your shoes. The blonde flinched upon the mention of the very act that almost pushed him over the edge. He unconsciously ran his palm over the scar, as if trying to lull the memories back to sleep into the dark recesses of his mind. I want you to know that I'm always here for you if you need to talk. We may not be related by blood, but I do consider you my family. Next time you could at least leave a postcard if you're going to leave. He said, chuckling lightly. His touching words quickly dissipated all the guilt and pain that had grown since he began walking to the academy. The demon vessel felt a genuine smile take his features as he looked at one of his most precious people. He felt the Chunin's arms wrap around him and embrace him as his family, the only family he had left. Thank you Haruka-sensei, he said as he felt his body begin to relax, sleep threatening to creep up behind him. Sleep was something he longed for more than anything, but he knew better than to fantasize about getting any. Today was becoming a huge emotional rollercoaster for the blonde, yet it wasn't exactly a bad thing for him. Both men failed to notice a certain Jounin Kunoichi who was watching their display from the door. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted you to go over Naruto. The blonde hunter slowly backed out of the embrace and turned around to face none other than Tenten. She eyed him down suspiciously as she took a few steps inside the room. His face remained impassive as he watched her look him over, as if trying to decipher some sort of encrypted text. I'm happy to see you are well Tenten-san, he said respectfully with a short bow to the confused woman. She knew the boy was none other than the blonde prankster from the Rookie 9, however his change in appearance and behavior was a bit shocking to say the least. The last time she saw him was a few weeks before he left village after the incident had occurred. Then he was just a tiny bit taller than herself but only by an inch or two. Now the man towered over her, his face also reflecting his growth with how chiseled his jawline appeared. Like all people who had seen the hunter in return, she was eerily drawn to his weary sapphire eyes, as if trying to find answers to unasked questions. Haruka coughed. Both turned back towards the Chunin sensei. Since I don't have class, why don't we head to your all-time favorite ramen stand and Naruto? I'm very interested in what happened over your long journey. He walked next to him and gave him a mischievous smile. I'll even pay. The hunter nin smiled back and nodded in agreement. Tenten's mouth was still wide open trying to find words to say, but remained silent. The other two gazed up at her with confused looks. Tenten-san, I think I just saw a fly buzzing around inside your mouth. The hunter nin's words quickly woke her from a stupor while she blushed to extraordinarily crimson haze. Sorry Naruto-san, I did not mean to stare, she said looking down at her feet. He waved his hand dismissing any offense. It's fine, your reaction to seeing me has to be the most toned down version I have received today, he said smiling back at her. She looked up and met his gaze again, but quickly looked away. She was having trouble keeping her mind focused, to which she could not understand why. I'm sure Naruto doesn't mind if you wish to join us, right Naruto? The Kyuubi container nodded truthfully in response. I would love to, I would like to join you, but I'm a bit behind on my work. I was actually coming by to drop off some papers I wanted you to look over when you get a chance, Haruka-san. She walked up to his desk and set them down, making sure to keep her head down as she passed the tall blonde. She returned back to the door briefly after. Why can't I look him in the face? Grrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr at herself. "I'll make sure to look those over and get them back to you tomorrow." The woman nodded in return and smiled back at the two men. "Well, I'm going to get back to work. It was nice seeing you again, Naruto-kun. I know Lee has missed you and your sparring sessions, and Neji is Neji. I'm sure he would like to see you too," she said quickly, and she bowed and left the men alone. Iruka looked at the now vacant spot she had been standing and smiled to himself. "I'm going to enjoy teasing her about that display later." "So are you ready to go, Mr. Hunter Nin?" The blonde nodded to his old sensei and reached to grab his mask from his belt before the Chunin grabbed his arm, stopping him. "Why don't you leave that off? I haven't seen you for years and would like to see your face while we talk, if that's okay with you." The blonde hesitated for a moment, trying to think back to the last time he walked freely without his Hunter Nin mask. He opted to leave it off while he trained with his old master during their sessions, but shortly after his death, he began wearing it again. It finally occurred to him that unless he was taking a shower or eating, which he did very quickly, he had wore that mask almost the entire 2.5 years after his sensei's demise. "I guess it wouldn't hurt to do him this one request, I owe that much to him at the very least." His arm went back to his side and he nodded to his old sensei. "On your way, I need to pick up something really quick and then stop by the hospital if you wouldn't mind." Iruka gave him a puzzled look before nodding with a smile, and together they walked out of the classroom. "Don't worry, I'm sure he will be here soon." The raven-haired little girl did nothing to respond as she just laid there in her bed, clutching the faded photo her savior had given her earlier that morning. The blonde-haired medic Nin had arrived around noon for her shift at the hospital when she heard the news from her pink-haired best friend, once rival. At first she was happy about the other blonde returning home, everyone missed him in some way or another, but few would really talk about him, knowing how the topic of why he had left in the first place usually surfaced in the conversation. What was in the past, but many knew how much the boy loved his girlfriend at that time, and it hurt many of them knowing how much pain he must have been in. What made her a little sad after such good news was how Sakura found out it was indeed him. She figured it could have been a lot worse, and he had every right to do what he did, but she could still tell it left her friend quite unsettled. After Ino arrived, Sakura was sent home for the day shortly after for being sick, but everyone knew the truth that she was just too shook up from her morning encounter to continue. Presently the blonde Kunoichi was trying to understand why the girl was unable to speak. After reading Sakura's diagnosis about her other ailments, she was curious if maybe something was wrong with her vocal cords. She ran her own medic Nin diagnostic and found herself concurring with the original assessment. The cause of the little girl being mute was not that she could not speak, merely she would not speak. They both summarized that perhaps something happened that induced something along the lines of shell shock or another form of extreme psychological stress that was blocking her ability to freely communicate with others. Sakura had mentioned that Naruto planned on coming back in the afternoon to visit the child, and it was almost half after 3. She hoped he came back soon, for seeing the girl so focused on waiting for his return was cute but a little sad as well. She was about to leave to check on the other patients when she heard voices outside the door accompanied by knocking. "Come in," she said in calm voice. She watched as the door creaked open, revealing the Chunin Iruka and a blonde Nin clad in all black. They both stopped their conversation upon seeing who the nurse was. "Ah, hello Ino," the Chunin voiced happily. The words didn't seem to register as the blonde merely stared at the tall Hunter Nin that accompanied him. Their eyes met briefly before the demon container averted his gaze to the now fully alert little girl. "It's been a long time, Ino-san, I hope things have gone well for you." He bowed his head to her and then walked to the opposite side of the bed with one arm behind his back. "I see you're taking good care of the little one. I'm relieved she has been in good hands since I brought her here," he said, smiling at the little girl ruffling her hair with his free hand. Ino couldn't help blushing at the compliment she had received, even though it was her job to take care of everyone there. She looked down at the little girl and noticed for the first time since she had been on shift her face actually appeared to be content rather than worried. She was brought out of her thoughts when the Hunter Nin spoke again. "I would like to introduce you to someone very special to me," he said, moving to the side allowing Iruka to get closer to the bed. She eyed him suspiciously when he first arrived moments ago, but upon hearing his companion's statement, she visibly seemed more willing to be trusting of him. He stood a foot from the head of the bed looking down at the child. "My name's Iruka," he then bowed his head slightly. He was informed on the way about how the girl had yet to even speak to Naruto, so he wasn't surprised when she didn't respond. Naruto took his place next to him and smiled down to her. "So you're ready to get out of this hospital and go get some ramen?" The girl's face beamed with a light he had yet to see since the little bit of time he had known her. She didn't need to smile to let them know she was definitely looking forward to getting out of the hospital. Her eyes traced to the corner of the room where his tattered dress hung on a rack. The demon vessel caught the look in her eyes and remembered why they stopped on the way to the hospital. I almost forgot, no princess I have ever heard of would ever wear rags when going out to get something to eat, he said smiling. He didn't mean to make her feel bad, but it seemed she took it the wrong way as she looked down at her chest. He quickly rebounded back to his original intentions. He moved his hand from behind his back, revealing a rather large paper bundle tied up with a box under it. She looked at it curiously as he set it on her lap. Go ahead, open them, Haim, he said quietly. The girl wasted no time and got to work on opening the bundle first. Ino wouldn't admit it, but seeing the display between the two made her a tiny bit jealous. She had dated many people since her days at the academy, but never would dream of being treated so sweetly, even if it was just because she was a little girl. In the 5 minutes he had been in the room he had changed a girl's mood instantly, something not many people could do, she mused. She was relieved he was too focused on the girl to notice her eyeing him down from head to toe. The child had ripped the last section off the tied bundle, revealing 3 beautifully designed kimonos. One pink one with flowers, a blue one with white swirls that looked like waves, and an orange one that had red Konoha spirals on it, like what used to be on the back of the Hunter Nin's old orange jacket. She was so mesmerized by the clothing she had yet to even open the other box, which would reveal a brand new pair of sandals, which he hoped he had choice the right size. Her face looked as if she had seen a ghost. After a minute or so she then opened the other box, seeing the new sandals. I hope you like the colors, I picked them myself and am not too experienced with any sort of fashion, he said, waiting patiently for her response. He was very pleased with the end result. She slowly raised her head and to everyone's surprise, her face no longer had the dull expression she had worn since that morning. She was smiling. You should smile more often, Haim-chan, it shows how pretty your face is. The raven-haired girl surprised them again when she started blushing a deep shade of pink, looking down away from the blonde Hunter Nin. Ino couldn't suppress the giggle that escaped her lips seeing the girl so embarrassed. Iruka seemed to enjoy the display as well, but decided not to embarrass her anymore than she already was. Naruto was a little overwhelmed by the feelings that began to enter his heart, the feelings he had long buried deep down in order to protect himself from anyone getting close. He kept his eyes on the girl's face, trying to understand what it was that made him so willing to make her happy. He had only met her less than a day ago, but he found himself rapidly wanting to be more involved with her well-being. He still wasn't sure if he was making the right choice in possibly allowing him and her to grow more attached, but decided he would think on that later. Take them with you along with the shoes and decide which one you want to wear today, and then we can leave after you're done changing. The girl looked back up and nodded quickly as she hopped over the bed, running towards the bathroom and closing the door behind her. The demon vessel shifted his gaze from the door back to the other blonde. I forgot to ask if you would mind if she could leave with us for a few hours, he said, scratching the back of his head. To be honest, I think a walk around the village and getting some fresh air with a hot bowl of ramen would do her well. She said, smiling back at him. Thank you, Ino-san. I'm curious where she is going to be placed after she is completely released from the hospital. I'll have to talk to Shizune-san tomorrow. A few minutes later the door opened and all eyes were drawn to it. She walked out wearing the new sandals and the orange kimono she chose to wear first. The Hunter Nin was surprised that she had chosen the orange outfit out of the 3 beautiful kimonos and smiled inwardly at her decision. She walked forward to the front of the demon vessel, looking up at him with a tiny smile. There is no question about it now. You are a princess, he laughed lightly as the others joined in. Her face suddenly looked down with her bangs covering her face, hiding her expression. The Hunter Nin quickly noticed and realized maybe he had said something wrong. He bent down to one knee so that he was eye level with the girl and tried to see her face. I wasn't trying to be Maya. He felt the wind knocked out of him as the girl launched herself into his chest. Her little arms wrapped his back as he buried her face into his neck. Her chest shook lightly as she sobbed into the Hunter Nin's chest, letting herself open up to him with her raging sea of emotions. He ran his arms around her and brought her closer into his chest, remembering the day the third Hokage had bought him his first orange jumpsuit and how happy it made him feel to have someone care. His chest wrenched in pain as his memory began surfacing the bottled-up emotions he had forced into the back of his mind. He wanted to join her in his heart, but he could not. He had not shed a tear since the day his master was slain by his own hands, the day he knew he had to keep his emotions in check in order to not allow his tenant to take over his mind. He did the next best thing he could think of. He held tightly and let her cry for both of them. Chapter 8. The late afternoon sun peered through the cloudy sky as day slowly began its transition to dusk. The hidden village of the Leaf glowed in the fleeting light as its people carried on with their final affairs before retiring for the evening. Among the many people, 3 particular souls were exiting a well-known ramen establishment, with one having a very content look on their face. After the 2 nins waved their goodbyes to the enthusiastic owner and his blushing daughter, they were on their way with their other guest. The hunter Nin had surprised both his friend and the restaurant's operators when he had only ordered one bowl which incidentally he barely touched. They were concerned but tried not to show it as they watched him fumble with his noodles. The girl that accompanied them was a completely different story. She had downed almost 2 bowls in rapid succession before her stomach caught up with her when she promptly entered a state of overeating comatose. The academy instructor smiled at the memory of how much she had resembled his old student when he would go Raymond crazy but was brought out of his musings when they both noticed that Haim-chan, which his blonde friend seemed to enjoy calling her, was starting to lag behind them. The hunter Nin turned around and kneeled in front of her getting a good look at her relaxed features. Her chocolate brown eyes were sagging lightly as she fought to keep sleep at bay, but both Nins could see she was beginning to lose. Her eyes were unfocused looking at the ground until she heard him chuckle lightly at her current state. That is the one drawback to Ichimaru's ramen. It's a natural tranquilizer, she responded by attempting to appear more alert by bringing her head up straight, but soon it nodded back to a slouch failing miserably. He kept his features schooled at her display, trying to not to deliver the wrong messages again like he had earlier. Suddenly he had a plan. You want to ride? The blonde spoke playfully to the ramen hypnotized child. She didn't have time to remotely respond before he lightly picked her up and hoisted her above his head and plopped her behind on the back of his shoulders. She clung tightly to his long spikes while he adjusted her on his shoulders and lightly took hold of her pale legs. He couldn't see her face, but he could tell this may have been the first time she had ever had a piggyback ride. Just hold on and try not to pull out all my hair, he said laughing quietly as she released some pressure from her death grip. After he felt she was secure he stood back up and they began their trek back to the hospital at a slow pace. Iruka smiled brightly at the display he had just witnessed and felt something for his friend he could only describe with one word. Hope. As night began to fall they reached a fork that would lead back to the academy, at which the scarred Chunin remembered the paperwork he said he would look over. Well, it seems this is where we part ways, he said smiling at the blonde. He looked up noticing the girl had fallen asleep with her face buried in his shiny blonde locks. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Like you did with me, I think you found the way to Haim-chan's heart, he said allowing a tiny smile take hold. He bowed lightly to his old sensei and turned to leave. You know you said that the Hokage won't let you do any missions since you're on the inactive duty roster, right? That stopped the blonde as he turned around. Yeah, sadly. Well, if you want I could use some help at the academy. You think you would be interested? He desperately hoped the blonde would consider it, not only the fact he would like to see him more, but he knew the students would definitely listen to the great Naruto and behave while he was around. The blonde looked down at the ground for a long moment before raising his head. I'll think about it, he bowed once again and turned heading the opposite direction. The bronze lamp on the nightstand glowed weakly in the dark bedroom, barely penetrating the shadows that loomed about. The blue curtains that covered the main window were drawn closed, keeping the dusk's dying rays from coming in and exposing the area. There were not many things in this room, as ninjas needn't bother with the many luxuries of the civilian world. All that was needed was what she already had. A bed, a desk, a chair, a dresser and a nightstand. Although they many times had the bare minimum of essentials, that did not mean they would forego sentimental items. The pink-haired medic Nin remained motionless sitting in the exact same spot on her bed since she had returned from work. When she first came in she immediately went into her closet and searched for the one item she longed to hold in her hand. Quickly she had found the tattered wooden box and trekked swiftly to her bed, sitting down on it. She carefully opened it as the hinges creaked, revealing many pictures and other trinkets of importance. What she hunted for was found quickly, pulling out an old white envelope that had already been opened. That had been her final action before she stopped all functions, staring blankly at her name written hastily on the letter she grasped. However unexpressive her body seemed to show, she couldn't stop her eyes from betraying her as a tear slowly slid down her cheek, landing silently on the paper below her. Naruto. Flashback. The pink blur could be seen darting over the rooftops as it flew from point to point. The current course was set on a place she had visited many times in the past 6 months since she opened up to a certain person. Many nights she would travel this same path when she felt the stress making her want to go crazy and knowing who would be willing to listen to her vent her frustrations. She had continued to allow herself to spiral into a hopeless wreck since her last meeting with her special person, but this time she was going to be strong and find a way to fix things. In all the time she had known the blonde Raymond freak, he had forgiven many who had come to see the light about him and welcomed them with open arms. She desperately prayed he would be willing to listen to her, willing to forgive her for betraying his heart. She finally reached his steps as she quickly ran up the creaking stairwell. Running around the corner she bounded to the front of his door, knocking loudly, almost as if trying to knock the door down. No response. She knocked again and tried opening the door before realizing it was locked. No response. She raised her hand to knock again. He's gone. She hadn't noticed a presence when she approached the building as the familiar sounding voice crept from the shadows at the end of the hallway. "Where is he then?" she said between huffs, trying to catch her breath from the overexertion getting there. He walked towards her, keeping his face in his usual stone expression as he reached behind his back, pulling out an envelope. She watched him come to a stop as she eyed the object in his hand. "He told me to give this to you." She reached down, taking it from him and examining the front of the letter. She looked down, seeing it was addressed to her, and quickly recognized the poor handwriting. "Where did he?" She looked up to face him and noticed he was gone. She cursed out loud at how he left without a word pertaining to the blonde's location, but quickly focused her attention back to the letter. Ripping the top off slowly, she pulled out a folded sheet of paper and opened it hastily and began reading the text. "Sakura. By the time this letter reaches your eyes, I should already be on my journey and near the Fire Country's borders. Due to circumstances I can no longer control, I requested permission to leave the village for a period of time that I myself am unsure of. I didn't leave to be spiteful about what happened. If anything, I wish something else could be done. However, it seems I must discover a new way to protect the village from what is inside me. I'm sorry for not being a man and telling you and the rest of our friends to your faces, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I want you to know I don't hate you for what happened, nor could I ever hate you, although I'm not certain how long it will take until the pain goes away. I knew a long time ago that when we started dating there could ultimately be consequences in the end if I allowed myself to become disillusioned because of my own feelings. I was naive to think I could replace the man you loved with all your heart, but I selfishly kept on thinking you would move on and open your heart to me. Please forgive me for holding on to you after he had returned. Had I known your heart was still set on him, I would have broken things off myself. In the end, I'm happy I got to catch a glimpse of what it feels like to have someone love you, even if I was just a temporary solution. It's obvious now that I wasn't filling your heart the way you needed. I only wish you could have told me how you felt before I found you lying with him that morning. It seems no matter how hard I try, I'm always second best to him, yet I can promise you this will be the last time. I made a vow later that day, a vow that I intend to honor until death takes me from this world. I will continue to become stronger and live my life for all of you in order to keep you safe so that you can enjoy the things I'm not meant to have. I'm happy you finally got the man you deserve, the man you have always wanted and dreamed of having. I may not be that man, but it felt good pretending while it lasted. Stay safe and enjoy the love you were always meant to feel. Naruto. P.S. Underneath the floorboard next to the welcome mat was going to your 6-month anniversary present. I still want you to have it even though its original purpose is no longer possible. She stood motionless, planted in place, her brain registering what she had just read very slowly. He blames himself about what happened. She felt her chest lurch, realizing the damage she had done to the boy, damage that only a woman could do to the man who loved her. She remembered the end of the letter and looked around for the floorboard he mentioned. It didn't take long when she found the loose board, prying it up easily from the floor. Inside the small compartment was a tiny black box no bigger than a fist, which she quickly grabbed, standing to her feet. Upon further inspection, her breath began to quicken as she opened it slowly. There in her hand she held the most beautiful diamond ring she had ever seen. It was a gold band with remarkable etching in the side of a rose with thorns going around the ring stem, and the diamond in the middle was a rare pinkish color, the color of her hair that glowed with an ethereal light. In her entire life she had never seen or heard of such a colored diamond as she allowed herself to become mesmerized by its luster. And then it hit her like all the weight of the world was dropped on her very heart. It's an engagement ring. Time seemed to stop. Her eyes darting back and forth from the letter and the box in her hand. At that very moment she felt the disgust and shame she could only imagine was nothing compared to how he was feeling, the man who had always tried to make her happy. She fell to her knees as the welled-up tears finally escaped, their ducts pouring down her cheeks. It dawned on her moments later the gravity of what she had done. She knew she had made possibly the biggest mistake of her life. Betraying the one man who she knew wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. She launched her head to the heavens and released a bone-chilling scream into the night. Then flashback. She clutched the letter in her hand as her memory faded out of existence. Since he had returned, she couldn't keep her mind off his once bright smiling face. What should she say to him? And what should I do now? Were just a few of the questions that plagued her mind. Her eyes focused on the Team 7 picture she had on her nightstand, watching as if waiting for something to happen. She stood suddenly, putting the letter back into the tiny chest next to the tiny black box, and left her room, shutting the door quietly behind her. The hunter Nin moved silently through the hospital corridors as he made his trek back to the bundle in his arms room. 2 times on the way back she had almost fell of his back while asleep, so he decided to wrap her up in his field jacket and carry her in his arms the remainder of the journey. He hoped he wasn't going to be fussed at about keeping her out a few hours longer than he had planned, but he had a feeling they wouldn't be too upset. He walked past the nurse's station of his patient's hall and nodded to her as he proceeded past her. When he reached the door he opened it quietly and walked in, shutting the door behind him. He noticed all the lights in the room were on, unlike last time, which he quickly hit a few of the switches so his eyes didn't go crazy from the brightness. Now that the room was dimmed his eyes readjusted quickly and he made his way to the bed. Very carefully he unrolled his precious cargo and set her lightly on the soft mattress with her head on top of the pillow. He reached down, taking off her shoes, and pulled the blanket up to her neck, tucking in the sides as lightly as he could. The blonde looked over his work and nodded in approval as his eyes traced to her face, taking in soft innocence of her features. "Excuse me sir, but visiting Naruto?" He turned around, hearing the woman's timid voice, and saw it was none other than the Hyuga heiress dressed in nurse's attire taking a step out of the bathroom. "I'm getting soft, I didn't realize someone was in the bathroom," he inwardly berated himself for being so careless. "Hello, Hinata-sama. I was supposed to come back earlier, but we got a little sidetracked. I apologize for my actions," he voiced respectfully as he bowed his head to the timid Hyuga. "Hinata-sama. What's with the formalities now after all these years?" she pondered. She couldn't stop herself from blushing while she eyed his toned arms and chest, since he still had his jacket off bundled in on of his hands. Her eyes traced down his body, taking in his new attire which she liked but missed his orange-black attire from before. When her eyes came to his face she noticed the long scar on his cheek and tried not to stare at it, but her body resisted from looking away for some reason. She quickly recovered, realizing this could get very awkward fast. "It's no problem, Naruto-kun. Ino-san mentioned you would be coming back with a patient before she left after her shift. When I heard that she was with you I knew she would be safe in your care, so like I said, it's not a big deal." She looked into his eyes trying to see his expression, but only saw his dull blue spheres stare back at her as if looking through her. He was surprised she had changed so much from the stuttering mess she had been before when around him, but at the same time he was pleased she seemed to be more confident, even if it was just her speech. "Very well, Hinata-sama," he said quietly as he turned back to the bed, looking down at the child. Hinata moved quietly as she positioned herself to his right, looking down at her as well. "Did Shizune-san by chance come by here while I was gone?" "Oh, that reminds me, yes she did. She came by an hour and a half ago to speak with you, but when I told her I hadn't seen you, she said to come by the Hokage's office in the morning to speak with her about the little girl." "I see. Hopefully we can get to the bottom of why this girl was on the street all alone." His hand drifted downwards, tracing her soft cheek, brushing the stray hairs from her face. The longer he spent with this child the more he could feel something beginning to trouble him, perhaps some sort of safety mechanism instilled in his heart to protect himself from the hurt of others. He knew she was almost incapable of doing something that could hurt him, but the fear still remained in the dark, digging deeper into his mind. "What makes you think you can protect her like you saved the others?" The fox laughed in his head while forcing the images into his mindscape of his last assignment, the only missing nin he had yet to find. What many people didn't know was the fact that hunter nins hunted missing nins for many reasons besides them leaving their village. Many were murderers, rapists, and other pitiful excuses for human life. This particular missing nin was a serial rapist from the hidden village of the Rain who had over 15 known counts of rape on him, as well as the consequent murders of his victims. The thing about this missing nin that particularly made his bounty one of the highest in the bingo book was that his victims were not women. They were children. "Remember the last one you found in that cave? I never knew such a little thing could be ripped open from her." "Shut up," he screamed in his mind as he heard the voice begin to drift away back into the recesses of his mind, but the message had already been made. His hand shot away from the girl's face like she had burnt, his fingers clutching the scar on his face, trying to subdue the pain and hatred clawing inside him. Hinata was so startled by the sudden movement she nearly yelped in surprise. She watched him for a moment as his shaking hand held tightly over his cheek, covering the long scar she had noticed earlier. "What's wrong?" she said in an alarmed tone as her hand glided towards his shoulder, her face confused and worried at the same time. She could hear his breathing becoming ragged as he struggled to keep himself quiet, but slowly he was beginning to gain back control. He jumped slightly, feeling the contact on his shoulder, and he looked at her with eyes she had never thought possible for the number one surprising hyperactive ninja to bear. The eyes of someone desperate. I have to go," he said in a wavering voice as he swiftly walked past her out of her reach, pulling his mask on and walking out the door. The door opened from down the hall where he had been behind him and could hear her call out to him, but he was too fast and out of the hospital in a flash. As soon as he reached the road he jumped onto the rooftops and made his way to his old apartment, hoping to be able to relax and bury the dark memories. Words fell onto other similarly dressed people who stood in a circle, each within their own respective places. The chamber's rock walls reflected his voice, making it echo throughout the dim recesses of their lair. "So he finally shows himself, but why now?" another said. "I'm curious too as to why he would reveal himself. He has evaded us as well as our spy networks for far too long to allow such a careless move." I'm sure he is aware that if he returned to his village we would find out, another figure hissed. Then we must act now and capture the Jinchuriki before he escapes our grasp. Another shouted. No. All faces turned to the new speaker amidst the group. They waited for his explanation as he stood watching their reactions, almost as if he was amused by their shocked expressions, although his features remained obscured. The vessel has become very dangerous over these last few years, and as you know we have yet to discover the extent of his power, since he doesn't show himself unless he is going in for the kill. He has even taken out a few of our higher paying clients, which has stressed our revenue quite a bit. We must not underestimate the coward in no cage, Broken Shadow. Then what do you propose we do, leader? Another figure spoke bitterly. We will wait. Before they could protest he raised his hand, silencing their rabble. The shadow is always weakest when surrounded by light. It didn't take long before the blonde teenager saw the looming structure of his old home in the distance. Thinking back, he recalled this area being a lot more slummed down, noticing that a few new shops and other buildings has been constructed since his time of absence. The locals must have started coming back to this area when they realized I was gone, he summarized glumly. He jumped off the current shop he was standing from and walked towards his apartment complex, as he was only a few hundred feet away. The blonde eyed the old rickety steps that led to his apartment, the red paint almost completely chipped away from the years of exposure to the outside. He took a few steps up, testing the stability, and then continued on his way moments later. The outside hallway that housed his little apartment had not changed much in his eyes. The walls still bore the cruel text of graffiti and other expletives ranging from demon to die, and sometimes both combined. He walked until he was in front of the door covered with similar ugly text. Using his key, he opened it slowly, letting the dank air wash out of the residence, as if reopening an ancient tomb. He walked in and turned the light on, and didn't expect to see the condition it was in. The place was cleaned flawlessly with almost no signs of the fury he unleashed the last night he had spent there. The walls had been replastered where he had made holes, throwing the couch and other items in his drunken stupor. He walked in further, seeing the kitchen reflected the same amount of effort with whoever had cleaned the place. His dinner table was in its rightful place with his chairs around it in their proper places, as well as the floor looked like it had been swept recently. Something seemed weird about the apartment though, as if it was missing some things, but he put that thought off for later. His legs led him towards the bed and dresser in the corner of his room as he subconsciously ran his hand over the mahogany furniture. He reached into his vest, pulling out a scroll, opening it quickly and throwing it on top of his bed. Nipping his thumb, he quickly spread his blood over the scroll's seal, and a second later it began glowing dark red before bursting into a ball of smoke. The smoke cleared quickly, revealing a large leather backpack along with various scrolls attached to the arm straps for easy access to grab. He took his jacket off, folding it lightly, setting next to the pack, along with his ninja sandals he had neglected to remove earlier, and set them by the door. He turned to go back to his door when he heard a knock behind him. I wonder. He turned around, hearing the knock again, and reached for the doorknob before the door swung open on its own accord. On the other side of the doorway stood his ex, her face looking rather startled seeing him right there in front of her. She wore her normal attire, he noticed, the same thing she had been wearing since his return from the training trip years ago, however her hair had grown a few inches longer. Her arms were crossed across her chest, holding tightly to her sides, as if trying to ward away the chills from the cold night's breeze. They stood there looking at each other, his weary dimmed blues staring into her vibrant emerald eyes. She couldn't describe it, but something about the emptiness in his eyes struck something deep inside her, causing her to break her gaze, looking down at her feet. Wordlessly he moved aside, allowing her to enter, which she took the hint and stepped inside. She walked into the house, removing her shoes quietly, and made her way to the kitchen table and took a seat. He closed the door lightly behind him and walked to the table, taking a seat on the opposite side of his late-night visitor. Silence descended upon them once again while both stared at the tabletop, the only sound being the light ticking of a clock in his kitchen. Were you the one who cleaned my place? He looked up to see her nod, her eyes remaining glued to the table's surface. Do I have any tea? She responded in the same fashion, which he in turn rose from his chair, looking for where it was usually stored. He found the tea in the cupboard above his stove and grabbed his kettle from below the sink, then added water and put it on a lit burner. He then turned around and walked back to the table, sitting down with a light squeak from the old chair. The blonde tried to think of something to talk about but kept drawing blanks. And his guest wasn't exactly being forthcoming either. Still, he waited for her to start. After all, it was her that came to his apartment without yet to say a word. She finally looked up with a tiny smile adorning her lips. I stopped by the hospital earlier today. The little girl will be cleared to leave tomorrow. I see, he replied. His head drifted up, trying to exchange his own smile, but all he could muster was half of one. She sighed inwardly, seeing that he seemed relaxed and not tense that she was around him. Do you know when the Uchiha will be returning with his squad? I went by the Anbu HQ and didn't see them. She felt a tiny prick at her heart hearing how he referred to their old teammate, but that was something she had expected after what had happened. Sasuke left with his squad 3 days ago. He should be back within a week's time, but he is usually back early. She waited to see some sort of reaction, but he merely nodded to her. I assume you guys are still together? He questioned impassively. Her body fidgeted nervously at the inquiry. She hadn't thought on the way there how to explain they broke up a short time after he left. How exactly can I tell him I threw away our close to 6-month relationship for a fling that lasted almost 2 weeks and then didn't stay together afterwards? She looked down at the table again, refusing to make eye contact. We broke up a month after you left, she said quietly. Again she expected some sort of reaction from him, but she got nothing in return. Before she could say something else, the tea kettle began whistling, effectively disrupting the tiny bit of conversation they had started. The blonde paced from the table into the kitchen and grabbed the kettle along with 2 cups and strode back to his seat. He slowly poured tea into both glasses and set the kettle down. He brought the old clay cup to his nostrils, breathing in the delightful scent that he had just created. Bringing the cup to his lips, he drank only a tiny bit, as if testing it for poison. It didn't kill him. It's nice, he stated, gently placing his cup on the hardwood surface, bringing his hands to his lap under the table. She nodded in agreement, mirroring his action and setting her cup aside. She decided in the end that perhaps keeping their conversation as simple as possible for now would be best. She was hesitant to go into such deep waters too soon. The pink-haired medic took in an exaggerated breath and finally looked up to her host, forcing herself to look at him and taking on his stone gaze. How does it feel to be back? It's okay. She smiled, even though there was definitely a weird aura between them, a feeling she couldn't quite place. She decided to get one question out of the way, something she had to know. Have you been seeing anyone? No, the blonde replied with a frozen expression. For some reason that makes me happy and sad at the same time, she pondered. So how long has it been since you last set foot in the fire country? 2 years, 10 months and 27 days, he replied seconds later, practically like he was reciting a memorized fact from a textbook. Well, that was a quick answer, but if what he says is true. Wait, you haven't been in the country since that night you left? Correct, the hunter Nin voiced. Where did you go after you left the Leaf? Many places all over the shinobi nations. I had to track many of my targets far and wide. So he really did become a hunter Nin, she mused, her memory of the blood-red mask causing her to unconsciously shiver. It was expected of ninja when you would have to go on missions and possibly kill people. Hunter Nins were a different story. Many of them were very isolated and away from the village for long periods of time, leading to there being a very select few who did the job. She watched his hand slowly raise his cup to his lips, closing his eyes, taking in another sip of the warm liquid. Do you really hate me? His eyes shot open mid-swig, looking at her with the same expression. He then lowered his cup back to the table. No, I don't hate you, he said quietly. Her chest felt on fire from the sudden warmth of the statement, even if it was a minor confirmation that he didn't harbor ill feelings towards her. She let a genuine smile grace her features, beaming at the hunter Nin. Thank you, Naruto. When Sasuke comes back we. No. Her eyes gleamed in confusion at the 2-letter word he had just spoken. What do you mean? She questioned, her heart starting to come down again. Things cannot be as they were. She wasn't sure what he meant, but the effect was still the same. It was like her heart was just thrown into a vat of ice. She tried to say something but couldn't find the words. She was speechless. He rose from his chair, walking into the kitchen, looking out the small rectangular window above his sink at the half-crescent moon, glowing in between the dark clouds. When I said I didn't hate you, I wasn't lying. She stood up from the table, walking over to the counter a few feet from the blonde, leaning her back into it, looking at the floor. Then why can't we be friends? She looked up, trying to see his eyes, but his eyes remained focused outside in the distance. When I look at you, I see a person that I must protect so that they can enjoy the things I cannot have. In time you will understand why this must be. She stiffened from his statement but wouldn't allow herself be cast aside. What about the rest of our friends? Are you going to just stop everything with them and act like nothing happened? His eyes shot from the window to meet her gaze at her remark. I have many enemies now, and I can't allow them to use my precious people against me. Therefore I must remain in the shadows to keep you safe. We can watch our own backs, Naruto. You act as if we are helpless to defend ourselves, she yelled involuntarily at her blonde host. His eyes flashed momentarily with a gleam she wasn't familiar with. Against some of these people you would die within minutes. But we're all Jounin now. Do you think that matters? I'm still a genin according to the records, so does that mean you or anyone for that matter in this village could take me down? He took a step forward towards the medic Nin. Do you think you could kill me? She felt herself shrinking in his towering presence as he looked at her for an answer. But Sasuke, she caught herself in time before finishing the sentence, realizing what she was insinuating, however the message was already clear. The blonde's face drifted towards the ground, his face obscured by shadow. "You still hold that blind faith in the Uchiha after all these years?" he said, raising his head to face her. She bowed away knowing she did indeed automatically assume the raven-haired teen would somehow be the best of any situation. He walked past her grabbing the kettle along with the cups from the table and set them in the kitchen sink, pouring out the contents. "Why did you come here?" the blonde said, his eyes cast down towards the metal sink. "I want to be happy again, and I can only do that if you're there with me." She took a few steps forward towards the blonde. "I told you already we can't. I still love you." The blonde's eyes traced to the pink-haired medic Nin who stood a few feet away from him, her face shadowed by her bangs. She took another step before stopping in front of the blonde, his face towering over her smaller figure. "I know what I did was the worst thing a woman can do to their lover, but I knew the day you left how much of a mistake I had made." Her hand slowly rested on his chest, the blonde unflinchingly watching her and not moving as if he wasn't even breathing. Her face rose slowly meeting his tired eyes. "I am so sorry for the pain I put you through, and I can only imagine how much it must have hurt seeing us, but please forgive me." Her arms slowly snaked around him as she took her last with her body pressed against his, her head resting on his chest as she lightly squeezed her arms around him and closed her eyes. His arms remained at his sides captured in her embrace as he stood there in silence. They stood unmoving for a long while as she breathed into his chest, holding on tightly to the blonde hunter Nin. "If you ever loved me then forget about me." She opened her eyes seeing his dull expression looking down at her, his face emotionless. She took a painful step away from him removing her arms from him looking at the ground once again. He walked past her still figure towards the front door and stood in front of it, his hand on the handle. "I'm sorry but this is the way it has to be," he said as he opened the door, exiting the apartment closing it behind him. She walked into the living room sitting on his couch taking everything in that had just happened, her mind digesting the information. "You have changed so much Naruto, but even I know there are things you're hiding from me," she thought as the built-up tears finally spilled from his eyes, falling quietly onto the couch cushions. She sobbed lightly in the quiet apartment before laying on her side and closing her eyes, hoping sleep would help her push away her troubled thoughts. From the outside window a masked hunter Nin watched as the medic Nin drifted into slumber before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. The morning sun showed no mercy to the busty blonde whose upper body slouched over her desk with her head resting sideways in the middle of it, a pool of drool forming next to her lips. Bottles of different varieties of sake and other alcoholic beverages were all over the desk, many on their sides just waiting for a chance to roll off. Outside the office the voices of the secretary and another woman exchanged greetings before the door began to creak open from the other side. The raven-haired woman in a modest dark kimono took a step and looking towards the desk. "Good morning Tsu." The woman's face suddenly lost its color, which followed moments later by the color returning only it was very red this time. Her hand that still held the door handle suddenly threw the door away from her, slamming it with enough force that it almost flew off its hinges. The resounding vibration caused many bottles to roll off the table, meeting their untimely fate of breaking all over the floor, however the Hokage didn't stir one bit. "Tsunade-sama. You passed out at the office again?" screamed the fuming attendant of the Hokage, none other than Shizune. The Hokage's head rose an inch off the tabletop for a second before falling back down with a distinct thud, a long sigh leaving her lips in the process. Shizune ran back around the table from the front of the room and looked down at the Hokage, her face starting to calm but still very displeased with the sight in front of her. "I didn't realize Bachan snored so loud. Louder than Jiraiya, believe it or not." The attendant immediately switched to a defensive posture, grabbing a kunai out of nowhere and looking towards the voice out of surprise, but moments later calmed down, realizing who it was. She watched as the figure resting his back against the wall pushed off it, walking towards her. The news of his return had got to her, but she had yet to see him since he left almost 3 years ago. Walked to the front of the desk, taking his mask off and setting it down on the surface, smiling lightly at the closest person he ever had to his sister. "Geez, you don't need to kill me, Ni-chan, I didn't make her do it," he said almost playfully, watching her drop her kunai and jump over the desk, almost tackling him to the ground. She held onto him tightly, her face hidden from view in his chest. He followed suit, hugging her snugly, rubbing circles into her back with his hands. Heard her sniffle quietly as a tiny smirk tugged at his lips. "Don't tell me you're going to be a big crybaby like Bachan," he said as he felt her pull away from him, trying to hide her face from view out of embarrassment. His eyes lightened a bit seeing her display only to return to serious when she turned to face him. She smiled warmly at him with her watery eyes and tear-streaked face. "I'm glad you're finally back, Nai-san," she said quietly, leaning upwards and planting a sisterly kiss on his unscarred cheek. They were brought out of their reunion by a quick flash from the desk, which they both turned seeing the other blonde holding a Polaroid camera in both hands. Shizune turned red for the second time that morning. Only this time she wasn't angry. The tall blonde on the other hand just looked at the Hokage with tiny smile, watching her shake the fresh picture in the air. "That's one picture I couldn't resist taking," she said, laughing at the dark-haired girl's expression. The hunter nin took a seat at the front of the desk, watching the others clear away all the bottles and other trash from the area. Moments later Shizune walked to the side, taking her post next to her mentor, said mentor, folding her arms with her hands holding her chin up. "So how long were you there watching me?" she said, slightly annoyed. "Long enough," he whispered. "What?" "Nothing." The dark-haired attendant cleared her throat, getting their attention back at hand. "I assume you're here about the little girl," the Hokage said. The blonde nodded. Shizune shifted uneasily between her feet, looking at the ground before meeting eyes with the hunter nin. "I went by the local orphanages and none of them reported having any runways recently. I also stopped by the district where you found her, asking around if anyone had noticed the child, which resulted in no clues as well. Given those facts, there are only a few things that could explain why she was there all alone." The blonde looked down at the ground, realizing what she meant. "She either isn't from this village or she has lost her family," the hunter nin voiced. The raven-haired woman nodded solemnly. The blonde looked down at the mask on his belt. "What is going to happen to her?" Naruto said. Shizune stiffened at the question and looked at the Hokage before looking back at the other blonde. "Since she is unable to speak, we can't really know what happened to her or why she was there all alone. Without any information to go with, the best we can do is to take her to one of the orphanages." The hunter nin twitched slightly, which didn't got unnoticed by the two women. "What about having someone from the Yamanaka clan do a mind walk on her?" The Hokage seemed to think about his question momentarily, but shook her head. "She is too young to handle that technique. Even if she could handle it, it may cause more damage than what was already there," Tsunade said, which the hunter nin cursed under his breath. They two ladies watched him as he stood in deep thought, staring at the ground. What if he paused as if unsure of what to say? "What if I looked after her for a little while?" The busty blonde had heard the rumor from Shizune about how her surrogate son had supposedly shown a liking to the child from the nurses she talked to, but this was unexpected. Shizune kept her shock hidden, even though she too was a little thrown off by the idea. Although it wasn't because she didn't approve. The hunter nin took his mask from his belt, running his fingers along the black streaks that poured from the eye slits. "I know I don't know much about taking care of a kid, but at her age I was practically on my own. I think I can handle keeping an eye on her for a few months. I don't doubt your abilities being able to watch over her, it's just there is one thing that I need to know." The Hokage spoke, sitting up straight. "Why?" The blonde continued, running his fingers along the mask, staring down at the dark eye slits. They watched him as silence descended upon them, waiting for him to speak. "When I look into her eyes I see myself when I was her age," the hunter nin spoke finally. Shizune and the Hokage listened in intently, knowing well how hard it was to get the blonde hunter nin to speak about his past. "But something isn't right about this. A child so young has no reason to be so closed from the world. I only became that way because of the hate of the demon." "What makes you think you can help her?" Tsunade said, regretting it. He looked up from his mask, looking her directly in the eyes. "None of you would understand," he voiced coldly. The Hokage unconsciously trembled slightly, hearing such a voice come from the other blonde. A voice far too old for someone his age. She recovered quickly, seeing his apologetic smile, but she could tell it was not one of his real smiles. "There is one big difference between us. I was too foolhardy and stubborn to allow myself to be consumed by my own darkness. It took failing the academy exam and learning the truth about my tenant to bring me close to finally losing it, until Iruka-sensei saved me from it." The hunter nin began remembering that terrible day that changed his life. One of the worst and best days of his existence. He suddenly stood from his chair, almost knocking it down behind him. "I'll save Haim-chan too." The Hokage smiled at the nickname, remembering how a certain pervert used to try to woo her with a similar name. She looked at her attendant and saw an equally approving smile at the chosen name. The Hokage stood from her chair, walking around the side of the desk as the hunter nin's eyes followed her closely. "Let's go and see what she wants." Inside the hospital, a certain little girl sat quietly on her bed, the various beeping machines and other equipment turned off the night before upon her heart becoming stable. She sat with her knees to her chest, staring down at the unfolded picture in front of her feet, as if waiting for it to come to life. She had been up since a few hours before sunrise, unable to return back to sleep or lay back down. A few nurses had come in to ask her if she needed anything, which she would remain motionless, as if not understanding their words. She continued staring at the photo, zoned out from any otherworldly distractions, until a soft knocking brought her out of her little world. Her eyes raced towards the door as it opened slowly, her heart racing in anticipation. Upon seeing the busty blonde followed by her attendant, her eyes returned to the photo. Shizune closed the door quietly behind her and walked at the side of the Hokage to the front of the bed, both noticing the worn photo in front of the child. The busty blonde put on her best smile, noticing the child's fixation on the photograph. I'm the Hokage of this village, Tsunade. No response. I'm also a good friend of. No movement. Naruto. Her eyes instantly focused on the blonde Hokage, watching her intently. She laughed lightly at her display. Shizune also was amused. I knew that would get your interest. She said, taking a seat in one of the chairs next to the bed, followed by her attendant. The girl's eyes returned back to the photo. The doctors say you're free to go today, so luckily you can stop putting up with the hospital food and be on your way. The Hokage said. The girl's knees sunk a little deeper into her chest, although the others didn't notice it. If we knew more about your situation we could perhaps find out where you came from, but we haven't found out anything. She paused, thinking of how to word the next few sentences. The good news is that you don't have to live on the street anymore. We've talked it over and if you want we can take you to some orphanages and see which one you like and you can live there with the other children. The child's head looked away from the photo, pulling her head between her knees, hiding her face from view. The Hokage looked to Shizune and she nodded in response. However, there is another option, she said quietly. The child's head remained buried in between her knees, but they could tell she was somewhat interested. We have someone who could watch over you for a while and try to help find out more about your past. It wouldn't be permanent and you would be staying with him at his house, which hopefully in time he could help you discover your origins or where your family is. She remained unresponsive, pulling deeper into herself as she finished explaining. The blonde motioned for Shizune to go to the hospital door, which she nodded and proceeded to walk there. Shizune, would you open the door and let him in? The blonde spoke, which she opened it, allowing the dark-clad figure enter the room. He walked in, noticing the child's posture and felt unsure if perhaps she would want this. After all, they barely knew each other. He walked up to the other side of the bed, removing his mask, looking down at the top of the girl's head. I'm Chan. Her head instantly uncovered from her knees, watching the hunter Nin in utter surprise. He smiled lightly at the child as he sat on the bed next to her. So what will it be, little one, would you like to stay with me for a while? Her brown eyes suddenly lit up in excitement, almost as if thinking this was all some sort of trick, before her blonde savior confirmed it from his own lips. The dark-haired child suddenly shot from her sitting position into his arms, squeezing tightly as much as her little arms could muster. The hunter Nin felt startled at first from her affectionate display, but soon returned the gesture, feeling that it was right. Flash. The blonde looked over, seeing the Hokage smiling, holding the same camera from earlier that morning, with Shizune giggling behind her. Where did you put that? In between your saggy old lady, Ba-chan. Suddenly her smile disappeared. Chan was brought out of her moment as she felt herself picked up from the bed. She looked up, seeing the outside of the hospital window, her hair flying wildly in the wind, held tightly in the hunter Nin's arms. Naruto. What if Neglected Naruto wants to be left alone? End here, and thanks for watching my video till the end.